Hey everyone, I'm Jo Holden. I'm an active conduit for source intelligence and I'm here to help the collective. So we've got part two of what looks like is going to become a series. This is a follow-on from a session that I recorded just over a week ago. So today is Tuesday, the 3rd of June. So on Monday, the 26th of May. I recorded the first part. Of what is going to become the Kim Goguen, Kim-Stalker, Kimposter. I think I called her Kim Scammer on the other one. Now she's Kimpersonator, Kim Stop It series. And this part two is going to be called Living in the Truth, which is a little adaptation to her Living in the Now two-part series that she did. I'll explain why I'm making a little bit of snarky reference to that as we go through this session. But in that first session that I did, which is still not publicly available at the moment, still got that privately. It's now on my YouTube. Had a few days of faffing around trying to get it uploaded to YouTube, which again I'll explain in a minute. But in that I explained that back in February of 2024, sent Kim and the UNN team some content. I explain it in more detail in that first part. And from that point, I've not only watched her misuse, misrepresent aspects of that content, some of it passing it off as her own, and in other respects, just totally inverting and distorting the information to misinform and disinform people with it. But in addition to those things, I've had some pretty heinous attacks, spiritually, psychically, energetically, astrally, that I know to be coming from her and her camp, whoever it is behind the scenes that she's working with. Again, I explain more about that in that first part. And I'd also had cause for a number of months to suspect that I was somehow, some way being unlawfully surveilled, listened to, observed in some way. I had been in somewhat of a state of denial about it for a while, just because it felt too weird and I didn't really want to accept that that could be happening. But it became too evident over time, too many things. I'd had personal, private conversations with people about found its way into her content and with very specific references in certain cases. And a lot of things that I was doing my own research around materials I was listening to and looking at and downloading and keeping records of. They too were somehow, some way finding their way into her content, again with certain very specific references. So that first part is me sort of laying out a case, showing examples. And there were recent examples in that first part I was showing within that week, where I'd started creating content that is going to be a 2.0 version, you could say, an updated version of what I started last year, which is what I sent the first 5 sessions in total, 2 from what I would call the reawakening sort of module, if you like, and 3 from the reality as a simulation series. I'd sent them over to Kim. She's been misusing, misrepresenting them as a result of recognizing, realizing that she was not a trustworthy figure and that I'd been kind of following along, on the bandwagon of what is essentially just a psyop. And I lay more evidence and explanation of that out in that previous session. Having still not made that public, what Kim decided to do So I recorded that on the 26th of May. On the 27th, what she decided to do was double down on her efforts to, I'm not sure if she thinks she's getting under my skin mocking me or if she's trying to intimidate me. I'm not entirely sure what it is that she's attempting to achieve, but rather than take heed that I was recording a session that I intend to share with people where I'm explaining that she's unlawfully surveilling me, she decided to use that content and make her entire session about how she'd been running surveillance on the deep state. I'm not deep state. I've got no deep state connections. I'm working alone in isolation. I'm a teacher. I come from a teaching background, I should say. But she decided to run with that theme and again use specific references from what I'd privately recorded, and also continue to misuse my content, which I explain in that first part. My concern is that what she's trying to do is she's listening somehow, some way, to my private activities where I'm recording things that are not yet public. We'll get to that. I'll show you. They're still not public. So I think what she's trying to do is utilize the material ahead of time, ahead of myself putting my own content out, so that she can then do a bit of a switcheroo and claim copyright infringement or, essentially accuse me of what she's doing, which is what all narcissists do, isn't it? They project onto others what they themselves are guilty of. And Kim, at this point, narcissist is a kind way of putting it. I think, honestly, she's pretty demonic, having been on the receiving end of what her actual energetic self is and feels like. She's the opposite of what she presents herself to be. So in this session, I'm going to lay out not just evidence that she's been, stealing my content. We'll look at other examples of how she's done that yet again in the report that she did on the 27th. And then she did like a live, Q&A, connect with Kim type thing on the 30th. And once again, still using my content that I'd spent the week prior recording. So, it's a joke at this point, but I feel like she should, yeah, just keep going. Keep going, Kim, because we'll see where it leads and we'll see where you end up and we'll see where I end up because I've got truth on my side. So, if it's the last thing I do, if I have to spend a whole lot more time and energy exposing you for who and what you are, I'll do it. That's fine. We'll see where it leads. So, part 2, living in the truth, because it's all well and good living in the now, but if the now's full of deception and if the now is someone distracting you from what you could actually be doing that might make a positive difference in the world, if it's someone who's just lying and stealing and acting as a tool for the very deep state that she's been busy recently surveilling, apparently. We'll have a look at that, shall we? But while she's busy making up stories and pretending she's working against these people, she's clearly working on behalf of them. And we're gonna look at it. There's plenty of evidence. Kim has quite the past, it turns out. So without further ado, let's move along. Okay, so this is just proof to show that when I recorded the first Kimposter session, what had happened was I'd recorded it on Canva in this sort of presentation style, like what I'm doing now. I hadn't realised there was a limit of you could only download a recording of a presentation that you'd done as a complete file with like the video narration, yourself being recorded talking, and the presentation together as one complete file if it was a maximum of 2 hours and I'd been presenting and recording for 3 hours. So I couldn't download it as one file that I could then upload to YouTube. So I had a bit of a mess about for a couple of days trying to get the video narration and the presentation that I'd put together, re-put together and uploaded to YouTube. I had quite a few hiccups, let's say, in getting that to work properly. So it's, I'm out of practice. It's been a while since I've done this kind of presentation, but I've, my memory is now refreshed. I do know, if that happens again, what to do next time. But as things stand now, I'm recording this on Zoom, so I shouldn't have the same problem. But what you can see on the screen here is May the 27th. You'll see there's a video there. It's just over 3 hours long. That was the original, what I'd recorded on the 26th. That was me trying to put the presentation and the video narration together. Got all the way through it, sat and listened to myself talking for 3 hours, and then realised that I chose the wrong options on the share screen thing. So it hadn't, in fact, recorded the me talking side of it. So there was just a PowerPoint playing and just every now and again a screen, the screen changing. So that was on the 27th, the following day. And then when I finally figured out what I'd done wrong, I did it again on the 29th, and that's when it uploaded to YouTube. So I'm laying all this out because I just want to make it clear the timeline of what was recorded and when, because Kim just cannot stop stealing. So we'll have a look at that as we go through. Okay, so look at me looking all pretty right here. So on Kim's update then on the 27th, the day after I'd recorded the first Kimposter video, coming up on today's Global Intelligence Report. Let me just move myself out of the way so I can read this to you. It's part 2 of Living in the Now. Not that the now helps us if it's just full of lies, but okay. And why now is so important to moving forward. I'm sure it's got absolutely nothing to do with, in my sessions, me explaining how time is ultimately data processing and, again, what we're attending to, whether it's truthful or not, will make a big difference in terms of what we experience. But okay. Everything the deep state has for control of humanity was built on technologies that were put here to harm us. This could have something to do with the fact that I point out that what Kim likes to do is make out to people that they're the victims of all of these external systems that are working against them. That if you look at the previous session that I did, I break down where there is truth in that which is explained in my content, and where she's took that and then distorted it and made it seem like people are powerless against these systems. Thank God we have Kim, who's single-handedly tackling them all though and taking them all down, which she's been doing for 8 years at this point. And I don't know about you, but I'm seeing agendas continuing forward. But so she's in reference to what I talked about, where I explained how, once again, she's just keeping people in this stuck energy of waiting for her to tell them when everything's going to be okay. She, doubled down on that, wanted to reinforce that. And do you ever feel like you're running on a hamster wheel? That's a good question, Kim. Where might you have got the idea to ask people whether they feel like they're running on a hamster wheel or not? Well, let's just have a quick look, shall we?
they gather the information that other people genuinely are experiencing and genuinely are receiving downloads about, and then they present someone as being almost like the epitome of all of that, and then people gravitate to that because it's like, oh yeah, because that's what I've been experiencing, and that's the guidance I've been receiving, and that's what I feel like we're supposed to be moving towards. And it's all of that, and it's not just to attract people to then keep them sort of caught up in this, and next week things are definitely going to change, or next week it's hurry up and wait, everything's happening, just stay right where you are, kind of. Once you see past that, it gets deeper and darker beyond that, because that's one aspect of it, that's surface level. Beyond that, who they're attracting in, there's a reason why you're attracted to that information. You are showing up, your soul transmission is here to do important things. You need it, and they know that, and so you're being attracted to things that you think are reflective of who and what you are. Understandably, of course you would, because they're saying all the right things and they're using multiple techniques to create that effect of, yeah, I'm just like you. And at the same time, they're forming all sorts of binds and bonds, and at the same time they are providing you with deception. Well, they steal your truth, so all the stuff you're sharing, all the things, project ideas, comments on videos, comments in forums, materials that you want to share, all of that kind of stuff. And so you're just feeding more and more of the representation of that false light back to yourself, and you keep seeing yourself in it. So this is me, this is where I'm meant to be, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And the whole time it's like a siphoning technique. And should you present yourself as someone who really does want to step up and step out in I feel like I've been kind of on this treadmill for long enough, it's the hamster wheel, and I feel like there's ideas that I've got, and I've got the motivation, and I really want to.
All right, so that was me on the 26th explaining and describing what I believe there's programs like what Kim is the front for, what they're designed to do, and having been on the receiving end of some pretty nasty, dark, occult sort of attacks, I've had to learn more now about what the various tricks are that they're using. And by tricks, I'm not talking about a stage magic show. I mean, the techniques. It's no joke what they're doing. And I think people need to be aware of it and need to be warned about it and need to understand how they're feeding the very people who are paid, planted, positioned to prevent them from activating and accessing their own higher potentials. And we need as many people as possible able to do that at this time. And so I'm not going to go into like loads of the explanation from my content, but it's in my content where I'm explaining, where that ties in with the reawakening process and the changes happening on the planet, and what strategies and solutions are available to us that we can be seeking to implement ourselves or calling for the implementation of, if it's on a more collective level, and the challenges and obstacles that we're facing. These are the key things that I'm talking about in the content that I'm creating, that all I want is for me to be left alone and allowed to get on with doing that, creating that content, and not have someone intrusively listening into me, not have someone consistently stealing key aspects of that content to misrepresent it or to lie and say it's theirs. All I just want to be able to get on with what I'm here to do and let characters like Kim Goguen do what she's doing for whatever reason she's doing it, because the truth will always out. I'm going to keep repeating that. People will be seen for who and what they are. As changes are happening on the planet, the dark will be brought to light. And I truly believe that in a very heartfelt way. But in some cases, it's going to require stuff like this, isn't it? It's going to require certain people being willing to be vulnerable enough to speak truthfully about what has been for me this past 14, 15 months. Very painful, very frustrating, completely uncalled for, but it's happened, and so I've got to assume it's happened for a reason. So that in mind, as you can see the screenshot here, I'm showing you that's where the notification came in to say Kim had recorded her session on the 27th, the day after what I've just showed you there were recorded. As I've already said, it's a 3-hour long expose, you might say, or testimony. And for her to be essentially, I think her attempt was to make fun of what I were talking about. I think it were her way, and as we move on, I'll show you some more examples of ways that she seemed to want to try and come across as if she finds it somewhat laughable that someone like me would be speaking out against, her very high-ranking self in her own estimation, at the very least. But to me, the reason I've put that note there, it reminds me of what Mark Passio has shared. To me, it's not me that she's mocking, it's all of us. It's people that actually genuinely want to participate, contribute to positive change on this planet, because had a direct impact on my life. So she's the one I'm talking about. So what Mark Passio, for anybody that's not aware of and I'll put some of his stuff on there because he's an excellent in some respects. We have different styles, let's say, in terms of how we present ourselves and deliver stuff, but he comes from a background where he satanic church you should live, but not practicing it themselves and being judgmental of others, but far from perfect themselves, as we all are. And got into kind of heavy metal music or death metal or something like that, and was in a band and was quite successful. So how, initially he the systems in our reality, doctors, judges, teachers, policemen, all of that. Many of the members attended up to in society, and for a time he enjoyed what he was doing until the rest of humanity in terms of what was planned and what was didn't enjoy the casual cruelty that is perpetuated behind the scenes, just how committed, dedicated these groups of people were to being lied to someone than it is to convince them they're being lied to, sort of thing. And that was their attitude. It was very okay. You're never gonna get the rest of humanity who are so distracted and so disjointed and so divided as a result of many of these agendas. You're never going to get them to unify in numbers great enough that they're going to be able to contend with what we're implementing. And I know that we're a bit of a long tangent, but I get the exact same feeling. The more I've had the behind the scenes activities happening, the attacks I've been receiving and whatnot, what I talked about in the previous session in part was just how using these various techniques in what you might call spell work, how layered it can be in terms of cloaking and the illusions that can be created. It's glamorizing. And the person that Kim presents herself to be publicly is nothing like the person when you feel her actual genuine energy as she's projecting that at you. Trust me when I tell you, there's no comparison. She quite literally is using the energy that she's siphoning from the people who are genuinely organically light beings, if you like. They are here with a love for humanity and for this planet and to see improvements in circumstances and conditions. And as she's utilizing various techniques, which I'll do sessions where I'll break down more of what I've come to understand from the types of practices involved. But as she's siphoning that, she's using that to present, the false light front, which is what I talked about in that clip. And behind the scenes, she's perpetuating what I would call evilness. It's everything that violates and interferes with life. If you're trying to prevent people from self-actualizing, if you're trying to prevent people from living in alignment with their organic soul expressions, then you are interfering with their life, and therefore you are violating them and their energy. So that would be evil. Okay, so just wanted to, show that her having somehow, some way heard me, because remember that session that I did on the 26th, still not public now. There's no way she could have known about it. There's certainly no way she could have been taking specific references from it if she wasn't listening somehow, somewhere. So let's see what else she says. All right, so what did Kim talk about in her session on the 27th, the day after? Well, she talked about surveillance she's been running. That's, who would have thought, where could she have got the idea to talk about that? And obviously, in her made up narrative, she's telling people that who she's been surveilling is the deep state. And it's really funny, as I put in the note there, they seem to talk about quite a few of the things that I pointed out, that I talked about in the session I did, where I privately was talking about her mistreatment and my desire to just move forward and move on from it, and what would be an improvement for the people that are following her rather than follow her if they were actually learning from people. And I'm not talking about myself here, but actually learning from people that do have genuine solutions and actually do want to see improvement on the planet. So she describes how the deep state that she was listening to, which we're going to look at in a second, because she throws these statements out there as if, because I listened to all the deep state meetings. She literally says that, we'll get to it. Really, Kim? Because there's dozens of agencies around the world, and each of them are highly compartmentalized, as you have spent years now telling people just how many adversaries you're having to counter and fight against. And yet somehow, some way, you're able to surveil all of them, everything they've got going on. Obviously, you wouldn't be quote unquote surveilling innocent civilians, would you? Because, that would be illegal. Maybe we need to be looking at just how illegal it is in a little bit more detail. But we'll get to that. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so she was listening into deep state meetings, and they were talking about how they could replace her. They've had all these years to do that, but they're now just revising that potential plan. And she references specifically that they wanted to replace her with someone that had knowledge of economics, amongst other things. In the session I'd recorded the day before, I talked about the fact that some of the ideas that Kim has presented as her own with regards to economic policy moving forward, as and when, she fully takes on the full title of being, queen of the world, what she's talked about in terms of production contracts and how that would lead to funding for projects and all that kind of stuff. She's taken the very model that Richard Werner, as an expert in economics, several years before Kim was ever known anywhere, and when she would have, around about the same time that she would have been studying her banking, doing her exams, getting a license, all of that kind of stuff. In terms of her own self-professed timeline, around about the time he would have been well known as a professor and an expert consultant in economic policy, would have been the time that she, as a student, would have been learning about those things to work as a professional in that industry, right? So I now know, I didn't realize this when I was trusting and believing that she knew what she was talking about. I now know things that she's passed across as if this is her vision for how the planet needs to operate. She's taken from his content, she's taken from his expertise, essentially. So I made that point in the previous session, and of course, the deep state were having a meeting about that very same thing. Then she also claims that when they realised they weren't going to be able to replace her, because obviously Kim is irreplaceable, she knows everything about everything, so who could possibly replace her? They then talked about possibly working with her. And as I've put here, that was, again, something that I'd mentioned past tense, as in that's what I had tried to do. I tried to be helpful and supportive, believing that no one would be making the claim she's making if they were lying, surely. So I had sent the work that I sent to her last year, obviously with the intention of it being a helpful resource for other people that were following her, bringing people, more up to speed if they were new to her information, but in addition, adding extra information from my areas of expertise, which I saw very much as overlapping with and/or aligned, connected to what Kim claimed she were doing. So that was that. And then when they discussed in these super secret, super important deep state meetings that they didn't want to work with her, or they might not be able to work with her, then they decided maybe she should just do her thing and they'll do their thing, and job's a good one. But that's exactly what I'd said in my session that I recorded the day before, that that's what I'd wanted, was when I realized that she's a liar and a thief and she's misrepresenting stuff to people, all I'd wanted was to get on doing what I wanted to do. And it would have been great if I'd have been allowed to do that, but I've been harassed and attacked, and I'm being unlawfully listened to, It's like, I just hope people understand how unnerving it is to know that everything you're doing, saying, it's like, I've not signed up for a reality TV series here, I'm a private person. I've not invited anyone into my personal private space to observe everything I'm doing or not doing, or it's creepy. And the fact that I know she's doing this, and the fact that for whatever reason, maybe it were ego, maybe she's just that arrogant, but for whatever reason, rather than take heed that I was recording a session where I'm explaining and providing evidence that it's very suspicious that look at what I were looking at, look at what I were recording, look at what I were, listening to look what she's now talking about, look what she's now presenting, how uncanny that just hours later or a day later, I'm laying it all out. You would think, with any sense, she would have thought, I had better, sort of swerve in another direction with this. And, the last thing anybody surely would want to do is add more evidence to the accusations that that I, in this case, were raising. But I think at this point, Kim, she's on another level in terms of however her psyche functions behind the scenes. I don't think she approaches things from a very balanced perspective at all. So obviously she then included more of aspects of my content, but presented it in a distorted way, and we'll look at that, proof to follow in this session. So that was Kim's response, I guess you could say, to what I talked about. No empathy, no recognition that actually it's wrong what I'm doing. Nah, just let me double down and let me try and poke fun and let me do more of what she's already proven I'm doing, but let me just do it again just to make sure I really stitch myself up with this, because I think she thinks none of this is going to have any blowback for her. She's wrong. It's going to have some blowback, trust me. All right, so here some screenshots. In addition to, you can imagine, I recorded that on the Monday. Kim, after doing her update, she would normally do sessions Monday, Wednesday, Friday. She postponed what she would have done or should have done the Monday night, and the attack started for me, like almost immediately. So her session that she should have done the Monday night, she did the Tuesday, she skipped the Wednesday, and then she did the live, everyone connect with Kim because I'm such a lovely person, on the Friday. So the whole week I was being constantly attacked. Particularly, it's been difficult in this past week to really get much sleep, because a lot of the attacks have, it could be because of the time zone difference or whatever, or maybe it's just the techniques that they're using, but a lot of them tend to happen astrally. So it's, when I'm in dream state, I'm constantly getting kind of roused and alerted, let's say, to things going on. So, I talked about in that previous session, I've got a lot better now at handling my own energetically with a lot of this stuff. I know how to clear a lot of it out, I know how to send stuff back. But it can be exhausting, because it's when they're constantly sending shit at you, it's, then you have the constant work of essentially warding that off or transmuting it, or so that from last Monday to today, there's been a whole lot of that going on. And then over the weekend, somehow, some way, started having all kinds of tech issues that, I talked about what went wrong with the recording in terms of the complete file. That was my own ineptitude. Not trying to blame anybody else for that. But I've never had any issues. I've not lived where I am now. I've recently moved here a few months ago, partially because I needed to. My guidance was that I needed to get out of the space that I was in where I had been living, as a result of some of the entity type stuff that had been sent. So, I'm ready for, clean slate, new chapter, all of that. So I recently moved house, and where I now am, I've had no issues whatsoever with any of my broadband connection or phone phone signal. Actually, that's a bit of a fib, but that's not been the issue this past week. What has been the issue this past week has been the broadband that I've never had an issue with before. But as you can see here, so I checked down detector just to make sure it wasn't like an area thing. As you can see, if you look over here, there'd been no reports. No one in the area was struggling with that service in this area. But what was interesting is, in addition to not being able to connect, so I was trying to put stuff together for this, what did keep coming up was that it was as if my computer was somehow, some way being redirected to a different network. So that at the top there, a network change was detected. That kept coming up, and it kept sort of it was almost like, you know, when windows flash up in almost like spamming you, kind of, they don't stay open though, they like sort of come and then close and then come. There was all that kind of stuff going on. So I'm no expert when it comes to tech stuff, but it all felt connected to me. In addition to the attacks, it seemed like there was some attempts to maybe redirect me to a different server or something. Maybe they were trying to get access to files, I don't know. But so that was going on. So that's the reason why it's been just over a week now. And I've only just got that first part uploaded to YouTube and this put together to now respond to Kim's response, I guess, is what's happening. But just thought, you know, I want all this on record because we'll see, you know, what I might need to do with it in future. Okay, so let's have a look at Kim's claims that she was surveilling the deep state, not civilians in the UK, but the deep state. So as you can see, this is the 26th of May report, and we're recording it in the morning of 27th based on a really crazy weekend. So she goes on to say that the deep state were having meetings local to her, and for quite some time it sort of struck me that she talks about these things as if, you know, obviously these things are all happening, and everybody should just know that Durango, Colorado is this super special zone. You know, she's described it as the John Wick Hotel type place where intelligence agents and military personnel and, you know, everybody goes there apparently to have these super special meetings because no one can get attacked or assassinated and whatnot while they're there. And that's why she moved there, because she's such a VIP special person. So I decided, if we're going to start, you know, dissecting, let's start analysing, looking at Kim's various claims of grandeur. If it is true that Durango, Colorado is such an important zone, as she describes, there's got to be some information out there somewhere about that, surely. You know, there's so many other places that so often get referenced and mentioned that surely someone at some points talked about Durango, Colorado. So I tried looking to see if there was anything on any other forums or, you know, anything that anybody else from as quote unquote insiders or anything have ever spoke about. Couldn't find anything. So this, as you can see, is just a very simple Google search, because it's strange. It's strange that you can look up the bases and the sites that are known to be special, you know, access type facilities and whatnot. Google's quite happy to tell you what they are and where they are. It's not as if, you know, fair enough, if you just turned up at the gate and asked them if you could come in and have a look round, they're not going to let you in, right? But just knowing that they're there is not a problem. There's so many others that so many other people have spoke about in detail and described what happens there and what's going on. So why the secrecy around Duranga then? It's a bit strange. So I googled it. Is it a military zone? I asked. Answer: no. No, it's not a military zone. What it does say is Duranga Airport is part of the National Airspace System and can be used by the military for training. Well, that's fair enough, because where I live, within around about a 50-mile radius, just above from where I am, there's an airbase, and not too far below where I am, geographically speaking, there's an army base. And the Air Force Base, it's quite a mountainous region where I am, so they often use the airspace above where we are for, flight training, if you like, for new pilots. It's quite a sight to see. It's quite, entertaining to watch. But that doesn't make where I am a zone. And I know Kim said there's a lot of ex-intelligence operatives and military personnel that choose to retire to that town or city. I'm not entirely sure. But that the same is true where I live. Because there's the Air Force base above and the Army base below, and not too far beyond that, there's also an outpost of GCHQ, which that itself, in fact, is a surveillance centre. Nothing secret about that. We all know, people know where these facilities are, and Google's not trying to hide it. People in the areas are not, freaked out by it. It is what it is. But they're not zones that we're living in. So I can't quite understand what's so special about Duranga that is so top secret that they'll talk about, military installations like the Mount Cheyenne. Kim's talked about that, and all the sort of underground stuff that happens there. Well, that's on YouTube, and Google. You can look that up. For years, people have been talking about that. It's not like since Kim said it, they've just decided like to give up the pretense and tell people. No, years ago they've been talking about that. There's so many sites. So did the search. Is it a military zone? No. Is it an intelligence zone? No. Could it be that there are just, certain facilities around, or as it says here, airspace used for training and stuff? Yeah, but there's so many places that would apply to, right? So I'm not going to read all this out to you, obviously. You are welcome whenever this is made public, if you want to pause it and zoom in and have a read. Or better yet, just Google it yourself. You'll see. So let's move on to the next one. Oh yeah, I did check just to make sure. Are there secret intel zones? Just, let's see, what will Google tell me about it? Quite happy to confirm, yeah, there are. Here they are, and like list them all. So again, why the secrecy around Durango then if the rest of the secret intel facilities, etc., are quite easy to find information about? Doesn't really make sense, does it? Okay, so Kim then goes on to say some of the things discussed at the meetings that she was surveilling, remember the top secret meetings, and then I've underlined here, she states, some of the things they discussed at that meeting, I listen into all of their meetings. So I'm not sure if you can see, because what the screen that I'm looking at, I've got like the share screen thing sort of, it's in the way of some of the writing or some of what I've typed. But the top question I'm asking is, how plausible is it that Kim, as one person, given all the caps she wears, all the responsibilities she's got, what is the likelihood that one, she would have time to listen in to all of the deep state? Because the deep state is a very general term, isn't it? Who exactly, Kim? What agencies? Give some actual names. What was the location, Kim, that you were listening to? When you say listening, do you have recordings? Can you share a snippet? There are thousands of operatives working across hundreds of projects throughout dozens of agencies, and you just have access to all of that, do you? Okay, let's see how likely that is when we look at some of the other evidence that we have here then. But here's what really made me laugh. So some of the things I discussed at that meeting, I listened into all the meetings, sometimes half-heartedly. So I've just scribbled there, lol. Because how prideful do you need to be that while you're busy taking content that someone has privately recorded that you shouldn't have access to, that you shouldn't even know exists, taking sentiment from that, doing exactly what that person is complaining about you doing, which is using their words, their efforts, their energy to inform your own content creation and distorting it. But the fact that you feel the need to be like, but while I'm doing this, I'm doing it half-heartedly because, I'm so above everybody else. Like, it'd kind of make sense if you actually were surveilling the deep state, if you wanted to give the impression that you're so much, you're so above them, it's just part of your job, you just have to do it. Bears, all right. But you're lying, and you know that, and I know that, and you know that what you were actually surveilling was a civilian who you've no right to be. So the fact that you then want to make it seem like, maybe I'll just fast forward through them later. Let me just explain to you, Kim, because I'm hoping you are listening to this. Whether you're doing it half-heartedly or whether you're doing it with your full rapt attention is irrelevant. That's not the point. The point is you have no right to be listening to, prying into anything that I'm doing privately. And the fact that I need to explain to you that how much you may or may not enjoy doing it, how much you may or may not want to do it, has nothing to do with what is wrong with what you're doing. And the fact I'm having to explain it to you is precisely the reason why there's no way, in any capacity, you are a representative of the light or working on behalf of humanity. These are basic moral and ethical considerations. So I'm glad you feel cool while you're telling everybody how much you're above the deep state there. It's not going to last much longer, just so you know. Okay, so, but we always have ears and eyes in pretty much every meeting, regardless of how secure they think it is. So, I'd laboured the point, there were private recordings. Kim should not have had access to any of my previous recordings that I'd done the week prior to that session that I recorded last Monday. So, she's wanting to let me know that she can listen to whatever she wants to listen to for the time being. So let's have a look, shall we? given that Kim has such a all singing, all dancing, super sophisticated quantum key integrated military or key intelligence and military system, I would like to know then, how is it that in the girls' calls that got leaked after the split from between you and Lisa and Vera, how was it that in those calls you're asking Nancy, who's a seer, which, no shade, not saying there's anything wrong with someone having guidance, and I rely on mine a whole lot, but if you've got this system where you can listen into any and every meeting you want to, regardless of how secure they might think it is, why then do you need to ask Nancy what the deep state is doing and where the deep state is and what the deep state are waiting for? Why are you not just surveilling that? Why are you not just tapping in, hacking into the phones, or, whatever cameras it is you use? Why are you not doing that then, Kim? Let's just play a clip, shall we, from one of those girls' calls. And I'll apologise in advance, there's some pauses in this, it's just part of the recording, and rather than chop it up, I just wanted to play it for you as is. So this is taken from the 1st of December 2023.
How that, I guess it was the Jesuit meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on 1 second.
Well, it just their meetings are always so different. Pretty much everybody was just told what happened. They were allowed to ask questions or, whatever they chimed in and whatever they wanted to say, I guess. But
Right.
and then they were pretty much dismissed. I don't know, go home and think about it. I mean,
So they
didn't get. But I asked if they came to any conclusions, and they don't. They don't conclude. I don't know. I don't know if it's done like differently, like it's not voiced, or if it's, they give the information and then they will send out the instructions. I don't know. It's different. It's not like,
not on me.
I don't really get anything from them. They.
So did they ever call the Treasury back yesterday?
Did they ever call the Treasury back?
Oh, come on. Yes, you remember Dick West called the Treasury?
Oh, Dick West. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. They don't believe so. He didn't. They don't believe any of the others did either.
Hmm. those days. So they didn't come to any idea about moving forward. They weren't told to move forward. Nothing like that. They just explained that the deep state was going away.
Well, they weren't told to move forward. But if I asked if they were told that the plan for the families was to move forward, I don't get a yes or no.
Okay. Has changed, maybe? That the plan has changed?
Well, I kind of get more of a sense that they all move forward together. It's not like they don't tell them to move forward and one family does and one family doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I get a sense that when they move forward, they all move forward. I think they're just going to receive instructions or receive communication or whoever they present it to them. But
Yeah. Okay. So they were told that they would receive new instructions?
yes,
Based on this info?
yes.
Well, let's see what they do, I guess. How about the Space Force? Looks like they're still going at it.
Yeah.
Can you please stop? Sorry, they're fighting on my legs and I'm just trying to like walk around the kitchen.
A better place to fight, right? No better place to fight. Best place to fight is on top of someone.
Yeah. I was just trying to get the lay of the land after yesterday, after everybody figured stuff out. So what about the Trump people? They're still moving on with their stupid shit? Or are they waiting for instructions from the Jesuits?
All right, so you get the gist. There are a bit more of that, but I just wanted to give you, an insight to Kim's super sophisticated surveillance of the deep state versus somehow, some way, she certainly has access to hearing anything and everything I'm doing. So why not use those same techniques on the actual deep state if you are who you say you are and you're actually doing what you say you're doing? And we'll look at, Kim has claimed that Nancy works with the Council of Five. We'll have a look at where she's got that from, because that's not what Vera and Lisa, and just to be clear, I don't know Vera. She seems quite a nice person in terms of how she comes across with what she shared after that split, and from her point of view, how that all went down. I'm not a fan of Lisa at all. I've explained this in previous recordings that I've done. Lisa was in fact the reason why I, for a time, had kept, although I'd been listening to all of Kim's reports and updates, and although I'd been previously involved in assemblies and whatnot, I'd kept distance because I didn't trust Lisa at all for reasons that I being given insight into certain things because my friend had worked directly, closely with Lisa, and I knew there was some shady stuff going on there because I'd been told about it. And for a long time, I'd given Kim the benefit of the doubt, thinking, you know, she perhaps, as a result of loyalty, or, you know, it was clear for quite some time there were a friendship between Kim and Lisa. I thought she was perhaps unaware of, or to, you know, more of an extent, unwilling to believe and accept that she would trust in someone who wasn't what they were presenting themselves to be. I'd not thought at the time that that was the case with Kim. I just thought, you know, she's maybe there's some nepotism going on there, where, you know, she's appointing people to positions where they shouldn't be, as a result of friendship. But, you know, that in and of itself, really, when you think about it, it says a lot. But benefit of the doubt was being given at the time. Since the split, which happened, you know, at the start of 2024, Lisa and Vera came out and made, you know, accusations against Kim, for lying in her reports, misrepresenting what was actually going on behind the scenes. So where Kim in that clip was talking about, you know, Trump operatives, she was trying to get the lay of the land, because since things had come out, she's talking about the legions thing there, where, you know, she'd made these announcements in the November that there were these legions of angels that were coming in and, you know, going into the treasury and taking over media sites and all of this stuff. And she was trying to continue with that narrative and basically fool the people behind the scenes as well, tell them that, you know, all of this was happening though. So, you know, she just wanted to know from Nancy's guides as to whether the Trump people were accepting that the legions were taking all their structures down. And, you know, it really gets ridiculous the more you think about it. So why are the deep state going to Durango? There's no evidence that there's any good reason for them to be there. Also, why would they go just down the road from her, given she's the one that they're having secret meetings about? Wouldn't they be better off in some other location where potentially she wouldn't be able to access them? And if she can access them anywhere and everywhere, why is she asking Nancy to tell her what they're doing and what decisions are being made and what instructions they're receiving? None of it really makes sense, does it? So let's move on. All right, so I've put myself a little note here, shout out for transcripts. I just want to make it clear, because I don't want to be a hypocrite, what I'm showing you in terms of what Kim's said in her reports, rather than retype it up myself, I've took screenshots from transcripts that are shared on some of the chats on Telegram, and I just want to highlight that the person who has been doing that for years now, who has been following Kim's information, I had interactions with this person as a result of working with one of the assemblies. She's an extremely hardworking, very creative, very dedicated person who has been producing these transcripts so that people who might not otherwise have access to Kim's reports, whether, you know, if they speak a different language, this person will transcribe them into English first, but then she's recruited other people who can do translations. And I think she uses some software to do some of the translations herself as well. But these are the types of people who are dedicating their time and energy, unpaid, but never been recognized in any, you know, like a pat on the back or a thank you for hours of work that they do every week. but they truly believe in Kim's message and Kim's claims, and so, you know, they're willing to do that on a voluntary basis because they genuinely care and they genuinely want to see, one, people have access to quote unquote the truth because that's what they believe it is, and two, they want to be able to spread the word so that more and more people can, you know, awaken to changes that are happening. And those aims, as far as I'm concerned, are completely admirable, and I think credit is due, and that's why I wanted to just highlight that, you know, this is the kind of loyalty that is being, from my opinion, based on my experiences, wrongly assigned to someone who is being completely deceptive to the very people who are willing to work for free and promote her and support her, and all she's doing is taking from them. But that doesn't change the fact that I do appreciate these being available as a resource, right? So okay, so here's another segment. Kim states, the interesting part about my position is I don't believe they actually understand what it is and who actually appointed me to this position, why I have it and how I keep it. And I would agree. I don't think anybody has the full truth of what Kim's actual position is and who actually appointed her. And so I feel like we should maybe start to ask more pointed questions and expect more detailed answers in terms of, yeah, Kim, how exactly these super special positions that you have, did they come about? Because you've given a very vague story about flying around the world and looking for gold to solve the US economy's problems after the banking crisis. There's been contradictions in these timelines, and it doesn't really make sense when people have dug into your quote unquote past in professionally, in terms of the financial industry. Things you've claimed have been disproven, they've been proven to be false. So let's have a look at an example of that, shall we? So let's also bear in mind she was a mortgage broker and insurance broker. I know people who work as mortgage brokers and financial advisors and insurance brokers. Not one of them have ever given me the impression that should, as and when the next financial crisis comes along, that they would feel it appropriate to take it upon themselves to start flying around the world to get access to gold to fix the national economy. Not one of them has ever given me the impression that they feel like that would be a sensible course of action for them. But obviously, you know, Kim's different. So let's have a look then at what Kim claims her background in the financial services was or is. So this is a message that Kim herself typed on Telegram when UNN used to have Telegram channels. You know, it's interesting, other people have pointed this out as well. Every year or two, there's a shake-up, there's a change in, you know, core global team members, chats get shut down, things get deleted. And so if it wasn't for other people keeping a record of certain things, a lot of things that Kim has lied about would have fallen by the wayside because there'd been no way of going back to check whether she did actually say certain things. So it's been useful in the research that I've been doing. There's certain chats online and certain channels which, you know, we'll talk about coming up, that thankfully over the past few years have taken clips and screenshots, and to keep a record of just what it is that Kim is telling people and claiming to be true versus what can then be checked and in most cases proven to be false. So someone had asked Kim about the businesses that she'd in her reports, she'd put it across as if she'd had huge success in the financial industries. In fact, she told people that she'd been a private banker. I know for a fact she said that because I heard her say that. Haven't been able to find a screenshot where she says that, but she does say, in answer to the query where they're asking her about, you've said, you've had all this experience and you've got this expertise in finance. It doesn't look like, according to public records, your account, your story, and the facts stack up. They don't seem to agree. So Kim asks, which companies are you referring to? And I can multitask and I can stay connected to source and type and do other things as well. Well done. Well done. Guess what? I am also staying connected to source, and I'm also talking on a camera, and I'm also recording and displaying other things I've put together. Not entirely sure what the point there is. Maybe in the comment someone had made, or the question asked, had said, you said you're doing all this and that. Are you really? It seems like that was kind of the gist. So she can do all these things at once. If you're referring to Mortgage Max, which was in 2005, it was wrapped up and sold. The whole portfolio and Insurance Max was sold with it. Both companies were designed to capture multiple revenue streams, and I sold them both for almost $10 million 20 years ago. Did I say 20 years ago? Yes, it was 20 years ago. Jesus Christ, you people suck at detective work. Now, this message was from the 28th of February 2024. So 20 years ago would have been 2004. Public records show Mortgage Max wasn't incorporated until 2005. So a year after she sold it and made $10 million, she set it up. Okay, but maybe they just got the dates a bit wrong there, but if you're only just starting it, how are you selling it for $10 million? But okay. Only it says that company wasn't sold, it was dissolved. Dissolution date 27th of December 2010. Now, in the information that other people have shared, it's showing there, I've circled at the bottom, revocation of certificate of authority, which, as far as I'm aware, and I'm sure I've read it somewhere in the various screenshots of the information that was shared, the revocation of authority and the dissolution was as a result of non-filing, which, just to be clear, I'm not criticizing. Many people have had businesses that have been shut down or dissolved or gone bankrupt, or that there's no judgment. I myself have had a company that's been dissolved. I'm not highlighting that as being wrong or bad. What I am pointing out is that that's not what you're telling people, though, is it? You're telling people that you set these companies up, that they had multiple streams of income, which, as we go through this, it seems Kim has over the years had multiple revenue streams. Whether they were ever declared is another question, but what you're telling people is not the truth. And that's where the problem lies, because then how do you expect people are going to trust the other claims that you're making are true when things like this, which I assume this is another example of Kim getting triggered because someone's bruised her ego. Clearly they've asked some question that's come across to her as they're doubting her, or, you know, they're undermining her greatness. So she's, as people tend to when they've got inflated egos, she's fired back, right? You know, she's wanted to say whatever makes her feel superior in the moment, and so that's what she's done. The problem is it's clearly not true. So, oh, and I've put a note here. Where I've circled next, they do not really understand the folks that we work with on our side. I'll do a whole other session about potentially the folks that, you know, Kim is really working with on her side. So, moving on, here's some more records. This is what other people had posted. So the same message that I've just read to you is there. And then, as you can see, information here as to when these businesses ran. And I have seen screenshots that people shared that shows more details about, you know, not just Kim being named as a director, but other people being added. And this is about Kim as far as I'm concerned, so I didn't want to show them and anybody else's names unnecessarily. So there is more information online if people want to go and check it out. All right, so now I want to come back to that whole Nancy is a member of the Council of Five thing. It's interesting that Kim has already been called out by the ACIO, which I believe is Alien Contact Intelligence Organization or something like that. So Kim did take, on their website, they have a list of all these various militaries, and it gives a detailed description of who these militaries are and what they do. And Kim did a session 2, maybe 3 years ago, where she presented that and read it out to people, and she did make it seem as if, you know, like this were her high level intel sort of thing. In fairness to her, on that occasion, she did say, you can go away and look this up, this is online, which she were referring to the ACIO's website, but she didn't put it across in the honest way of, I've come across this on their website, I'm now sharing it with you because it's relevant to some of the other things I'm talking about. She didn't say it that way. She misrepresented it. So she made it seem as if, you know, this is the intel I have as a result of the role I do, and these are the people that I deal with. And guess what? There's also this other source. You can go and have a look if you want to. You know, so she made it seem as if they'd basically just posted on their website what she already knew, you know, but that's not how it truthfully played out. And this is what one of the things that Vera had talked about, that Kim knew, you know, that she'd never, up to that point in her updates, her reports, she'd never referenced in detail these specific militaries and stuff. She'd, you know, because she didn't have that information. But when someone had brought it to her attention, or when she'd found it on the ACIO website, that's when she started talking about it as if it was, you know, very much a part of her day-to-day activities. These are the people we come across. So the ACIO, Kim for a time made it seem as if, you know, the GIA, Global Intelligence Agency, had a working relationship with ACIO. And then the ACIO called her out in a YouTube video where they were basically like, you know, there's basically someone scamming people and passing our intel off as their own. And as you can imagine, Kim wasn't too impressed with that. So her narrative since then, despite having claimed, so on one occasion, Vera talks about how the UNN app had been experiencing some issues. People were having problems trying to log in and play videos, and Kim had done a report where she told people that they'd been heavily hacked and attacked, and the deep state were trying to take down UNN because of what she's telling people. But they'd called in help from ACIO, and they'd managed to not only stop the hacking, but in the meantime, what they'd found access to were these servers where there were, child trafficking sites and this kind of stuff. And so really, it's a good job that the hacking happened, but your services will be back to normal now. But just so you know, the good that's come from this is we've took down this network of, not going to be graphic about it, but, who would be accessing trafficking sites, right? So, Vera said, that's what she told people in this report. What really happened behind the scenes is we were getting reports from users, complaints or customer service requests being like, why can I not log in? Why am I not getting access to, why is this video not playing? So in the girls' call, Vera had talked about it because Vera were dealing with that admin side of, the platform. So Kim had told Vera at the time that she was going to reach out to ACIO and ask them to investigate it, which that's interesting, isn't it? Because you're the director of the Global Intelligence Agency and you have the quantum system. So why do you need to bring ACIO into it? But okay, so Vera had left it with Kim. Kim had never got back to Vera with any update or answers, and they were still getting people asking questions. So Vera contacted Vimeo, which hosts the app, the platform, and went, as you would, through a troubleshooting, technical support kind of situation. It got resolved. Everything started working again. Happy days. But rather than report that, what Kim reported instead is how she'd, GIA and ACIO had took down this whole trafficking ring thing and they'd been hacking, but it was made up. So that was one of the things in Vera's testimony that she talked about after the split. Now, coming back to, and that's why I got on that track. And Vera was the one that said, Kim has made claims that Nancy works with the Council of Five, but that's a Kim appointed title. Because Nancy had originally been working as part of the team when Kim was in a partnership, let's say, with Tank at the time. So it went from when she met Tank, you were already running Speak Project. Tank already had a team of people that worked with him on that Speak Project. Kim then sort of joined that team. Speak Project became Life Force. Life Force then became UNN. And Nancy had been involved, I believe, from the Speak Project days as a member of Tank's team helping out with admin stuff on a voluntary basis. And someone within that team had taught Nancy how to, connect with higher guidance, which great. There's no, again, criticism intended here. I'm not trying to diminish Nancy and the abilities that she has. On the other hand, Kim has put it across to people as if Nancy's, some sort of highly trained industrial psychic sort of, and has this connection to Council of Five. It's interesting she would choose Council of Five because I've just been talking about Kim for a time, acted as if Global Intelligence Agency and ACIO were working together, after they called her out and said, you know, there's people out there using our information, and they named her specifically, and there's no affiliation, you know, we're not in any way connected to what she's doing over there. Kim changed her tune, as you would imagine, and she's since been telling people that ACIO are running all the militaries, which, again, I'm not criticising. If you look at ACIO website, they've got some very interesting information on there. They've got a YouTube channel where they do like these, you know, reports from, there's a guy who's like an insider, intel agent type thing. They all seem to have had very interesting backgrounds in terms of involvement in various projects, and as you can see here, this is one of the sort of founding members of ACIO, but I doubt they would expect nor agree that they would be being talked about as if they're running the militaries, you know, in any kind of official capacity. I think they have connections with people involved in said militaries, but I don't think they are claiming to, you know, be calling the shots. So interesting that Kim's now shifted them over into deep state category, and exaggerated, you know, what involvement, if any, they would have over there. But the Council of Five thing, where could Kim have got the impression that Nancy's working with the Council of Five? Well, it just so happens that Jessica Ariel, I think you would pronounce it, Morocco, this as a founding member of ACIO, she has also worked as a galactic liaison communicating with the Council of Five. Interesting. So the Council of Five then, according to Kim's intel, are working both sides of the fence, aren't they? Because they're assisting ACIO, who are now, you know, heavily involved with deep state running the militaries, and they're also communicating with Nancy, who's working with Kim, the representative of the light, the UPU, whatever, you know, ambassador. She's the one bringing all the positive change in, but yet the guidance that's coming to them is also helping the deep state. So that's kind of interesting. So this is another message that Kim had put on one of the Telegram chats when the UN had a Telegram chat. This is someone that had, after those girls' calls recordings had been shared, they'd basically called her out and been like, you know, you've said you run this system and you've got key integrated military or key intelligence and military system, key integrated monetary system, key integrated media system. I think the latest is key integrated mastery system. So she's got all of these, all singing, all dancing, state of the art AI techs, and yet, as we saw earlier, she's asking for guidance, and she's asking for guidance from someone who, not Nancy herself, but Nancy's receiving that guidance from Council of Five, which, you know, when you start looking up various councils, let's say, of a higher dimensional or higher density or intergalactic or whatever, you know, off planet or non-physical kind of, when you start looking into it, there's so many, you know, and I'm not slating any of them. I personally, in terms of my guidance, I've never kind of got into the whole like, and who's this guy and where's that from? To me, it's all about, is the guidance I'm receiving steering me towards helpful, life supportive, not just good for me, good for others, good for the planet as well? You know, like, is it all of the stuff I talked about in that God, source, creator, sovereignty session? Does it align with and agree with that? If it does, then it's guidance I'm receiving that is inspiring and instructing and informing me to move forward, to express self as a representation of the organic design, right? The original design. So if that's the case, good. I haven't ever quite got into this group and that group and the other group. And the main reason for that, and I mentioned in the last session that I did, the part 1 to this, Shane Sadar, I'd never engaged with his content until I started doing more research into Kim's background this past year or so. And that sort of led me down the path of looking back at the blog that he did. In that, one of the things he talks about is names. And he's saying, you know, he's basically saying, look, the whole plan for keeping people in a state of confusion and stuff is to have such a mishmash of information where people can literally be talking about the same thing but using different terms for it, and then will find themselves disagreeing despite the fact that in essence what is being said is it does agree. It's you're both right and or both wrong, depending how you look at it. But you're both really saying the same thing. You're just using, you know, different titles, different labels, different. And my background is social sciences and linguistics. And so I've spent years studying various aspects of human behavior and communication. And one of the things that I think is the most significant thing for people to get their head around is most of the time when we think we disagree, it's either we're looking at it from a different level of abstraction. So, you know, it's the whole we're not on the same wavelength thing, as in you're looking at it from one sort of level, I'm looking at it from another level, and that's why we can't agree, because of course what seems to be important is going to differ dependent upon whether you're looking big picture or you know, the very specific detailed sort of level. It's that, and or it's the use of different labels, etc. And people get so hung up on that that rather than find the commonality, they'd rather have the whole like I'm right, you're wrong attitude. And I see this so often with Kim's communication. And it's funny because I'm going to play you a clip of her in a little while. And in she talks about how, you know, I'm not always the fun Kim that you see on Telegram, and that, you know, that's just part of my persona, but I've got to be super serious and, you know, like kick ass and all of that. And it's like, I saw more occasions of Kim lashing out at people on Telegram than I did her being ha 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 fun Kim, you know. But again, it's interesting how people can perceive themselves versus how they come across to others. So in this is her firing back at someone again, having felt criticized, I guess, because someone had basically called her out for exaggerating her position and making claims that she has access to tools and systems that it doesn't seem like she would have. So I've highlighted, rather than read out the whole thing, I've highlighted just a few bits that will become relevant as we move on. So we talked about the Nancy Council of 5 thing. I've been doing this job since 2008, officially since 2012, with zero help from anyone. I came here to Durango in 2016. Well, okay, when you say you came there, Kim, your backstory has stated numerous times you were taken there, you were handled. In fact, we'll get to a clip where she states that she was taken there while the deep state were attempting to handle her. She's obviously proven to them now that she cannot be controlled and she's the one in control. But it's kind of interesting because if you were taken there, how is it that you ended up staying then? Because if they put you where you are, if you're not conforming or complying, wouldn't they have wanted to have you back out then? Are did they pay for you to move there? But if you went there of your own accord, then that's a different story, isn't it? Because if you chose to be there and therefore you've been handling, all your expenses for being there and stuff, that would make more sense as to why you wouldn't feel under any kind of threat of them kicking you out. But it also would paint a very different picture to what you've claimed, that it's a zone and it's, it's so important and stuff. So clarification needed. There were no ladies when I was running around this planet, either way back in 2008, 2010, 2011, 2013, 2015, and was out of the country for months at a time. Again, we'll look at a clip where Kim is making these claims that she's flying all around the world and stuff. But yeah, according to the backstory that she's given, number one, she wasn't operating at these high levels in the financial sector, in the financial world. So if you were flying around the planet, I would suggest that the evidence points to, as we're going to look at, you were flying around the world for other purposes, not for the ones you've stated. But if you were doing that, and you were doing that all in isolation, all alone, how is it that in a clip we're going to look at, you describe all the handlers you had and all the people you were introduced to and all of that? Because if you're working and networking and being pulled into these super high profile, super special elite circles, you're not working alone, then are you? Contradiction. But we'll come back to that because I want to play some clips of it coming from her own mouth rather than it seem like I'm just trying to twist what she's saying. Again, I've highlighted here, she's really driving home this, I was finally not alone and finally had some help. It in no way diminishes the fight I have been in against all things human and all things not. So that's her basically saying, I've had the entire deep state and all the nefarious non-humans on the planet to deal with all of these years. So let's see what evidence there is for her having to do that. So I'm going to play a clip from, this was from the 1st of August 2017. This were Kim being interviewed on the THI Truth on an Integrity podcast that Thomas Williams did, and it's not it wasn't her debut. She'd already done the UPU show with Ava Cowan and Megan Martinez the year before, 2016. But this is, things were really ramping up by this point. So this is Kim describing everything that she got on. So let's hear her describing what she got going on at this point.
Everyone is learning. So this is a new experience for everyone. Everybody has little bits and pieces which make up a whole. And if the 8 billion people on planet Earth were all swinging the same bat and working together, there would be no more control system within days. But that's not the case right now. So we do have a few million people working together with us, and they are a team, and there is no one person that is more important than another. We are all equal, and we are all students. So we appreciate, yourself, Thomas, and all of the other people out there that are trying to help fix the system.
Yeah. So, if what will the impact be globally if most, if not all, of the countries followed the Kingdom of Mana blueprint that's been set forward?
Well, the trust, which is part of the decision making and the implementation of the Kingdom of Mana, the trust had decided when it went under new management to rename the trust in totality as the Mana Trust, as you put on your site. So the impact globally, now that the trust is under different management, is actually to destroy the trust. So the trust currently has the central control power of sovereignty virtually over every single nation on earth and every person on earth and every soul on earth. And the new management of the trust is trying to break that entire system down. And it does have the legal authority, thanks to our teachers, to actually do that. So once the blueprint is actually followed, each nation will become a nation unto itself, each person a person unto itself. And even though you still may be a citizen of, for example, the United States or any other nation, you are still a person unto yourself with a living soul, and no longer behooven to a centralized controlling point.
So that basically ends the can have for the rest of the world.
The Kingdom of Mana is designed to be a teacher, not an enemy, but a teacher. Right now, we're having a significant impact on teaching the nations how to become a sovereign unto yourself. And there are several different structures which control what you call banking. Banking is not a safe. It is not a storage facility. It is a means by which water abuts land. So we can talk about admiralty law and whatnot, but the whole structure is basically a play on words. So the Kingdom of Mana and all its associates and its teams have figured out all of the legal loopholes dating back 16,000 years until today in order to assist all of humanity and all of the nations on being free. So to the return, everything from the return of your soul and the return of your property.
Okay, so in those two clips, she claims to have a few million people working with the group she's working with at the time, and they're going into all the different countries and presenting to governments and preparing the people to be taught how to circumvent all of these legal loopholes that have been keeping us trapped in these systems, which doesn't agree with her claim that she's all the way up to 2021, according to her, she was fighting the deep state all alone. Well, what happened to these few million people that you were working with? Why have we not heard from them? Why are we not seeing them come forward and explain all of these activities that were happening all the way back in 2016 and 2017? We're what, 7, 8 years on now? 9 years, if we're going back to 2016. What happened to all of these people? And all of the legal loopholes. If you look back at the content I've been recording, and it's not publicly available at the minute, but by the time this is, that will be. If you look back at what I'm talking about, these are things I've had to go away and find because it's not been in Kim's content. Kim hasn't been explaining to anybody how to actually take their sovereignty and utilize it in an organic way where they can free themselves from any of these systems. In fact, she's done quite the opposite. Her example has been to tell everybody how corrupt all the systems are, tell everybody how the deep state are operating without charter, without agreement, without covenant. You know, everything that they're doing, it's all unlawful. And yet, she's happily registered herself into their systems to have a for-profit business where she can sell stuff to people. Why not demonstrate to us, Kim, that you have all this knowledge? You claimed it 8 years ago, that you knew how to free people from these systems. You were doing it according to you. So what happened? What happened in between whereby you will now talk about anything and everything from a distorted, we're in the golden age, but yet nothing's changed. I'm waiting for someone to make it make sense to me, because the only thing I can see is that what I said in the previous, you know, the part 1 to this, and what I've said in previous sessions that I've recorded, is that by design, Kim is leading people down a cul-de-sac where all there is at the end is a merry-go-round that you go round and round and round. You end up more confused than you came into the situation being. And I guess the plan is that you'll feel so sickened by the experience that you'll just walk away and not want to actually do anything. That's what I think the design is. And in addition, what I showed you in that clip at the very beginning of me from that previous session, in addition, you'll have been harvested and siphoned from, and should you show any real potential to do anything that might actually inspire real change, you'll be targeted just as I have been. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure as and when this information is made publicly available, I'm sure there'll be other people that will also come forward and say, I didn't want to say it because you feel crazy admitting that you've been energetically, psychically, spiritually, astrally attacked. You feel crazy saying you feel like you've been watched and listened to. But I know I can't be the only one. So let's see what comes as things move forward. All right, so what evidence might there be that Kim possibly, potentially, is involved in the deep state who she claims to be fighting against? Let me just move that. So I've got a couple of clips here. First, let's hear from Kim herself, and then I've got a clip from Kerry Cassidy.
Things today, and before I get into the what, I want to talk a little bit about myself and my personality. And so some of you have gotten to know me a little bit on the threads. So you know me as the fun Kim that's laughing and joking and blowing off things that people consider to be difficult circumstances. But that's just who I am. Now, to me, these things are not difficult circumstances at all. And you're going to learn a little bit more about that today. But I wanted to point out one thing. A warrior, a real warrior of the light, fights with their heart. Their heart is what gives them strength. Their love for humanity, like my love for humanity, gives me strength. My love for Source gives me strength, guidance, wisdom, and many other things that you're going to learn about me today. I've been in a lot of strange circumstances in my life, and I want to explain them to you and not scare you, because there's some scary things here we're going to talk about that Kim has done. And I'm not just the smiley girl on the internet. But more to give you an idea on why certain circumstances are kind of, not really a situation to me. A situation is some of the things I'm about to explain to you. That's in part. There have been people that have come and gone in the care chat that have talked about things like they're fighting the globalists and all of these things, and they're doing protests and whatnot. And although those things are important, because you can only do what you can do. But the things that I do are a little bit different. And a little bit more difficult. Things that I have used in the past to achieve these objectives and to earn all these scars were, I do have the ability to remote view, which under certain circumstances becomes extra heightened. I have used this in the past to get in and out of buildings that I've never been in before, to run around cities I've also never visited before, to find my way in and out of things, to find out who's coming around the corner and maybe take a different turn, those types of things. And of course, I use it to locate different things. Before, I had the key intelligence and military system up and running the way that it is now. So that's part of it. Number two, most people, when their adrenaline starts pumping really hard, they start to shake. I mean, these are extreme circumstances. People start to shake. And for everyone and every human, that's different. That's a different response. For me, I've actually learned to channel my adrenaline, get my heart rate down to about 60. And then it's much easier for me to do that and channel my energy in order to have a more effective result against, for example, a larger physical opponent. Of course, source is always there. And when you fight with God or source, you never lose a battle. I would tell you that my first physical altercation in my life was when I was about 11 years old. And at that point, I started learning Muay Thai and a bunch of other types of fighting skills. At the time, it was illegal in the U.S. to teach it here. But we found a way to take it anyway. I was in a really bad neighborhood, and so there were some instructors that offered to teach some of us young people the arts. We spent hours and hours and hours learning how to pinch bottle caps with your fingers and fold them in half and punch your fingers through cans and all kinds of things. So it's not like I was actually formally trained by any agency or any military or anything like that. These were life skills I was learning to protect myself in a very bad neighborhood. And once you learn these life skills, they never go away. So there's a number of different things that I use, and have used to protect myself. Mm-hmm. Now, this being said, there are some of you that have mentioned that I am being, quote unquote, attacked on Telegram. And I laugh at that statement because it's not an attack. And I'll explain to you what an attack is. I have some notes here we're going to go by in just a few moments. That is like a joke. Some people have asked, why don't I file copyright against Team Bubba or something like that? Because I just don't care. I know they're NSA and I know they're MI6. And if I was actually going to attack them, it wouldn't be with a copyright. Yeah. Okay. They're just kind of irrelevant, but they say there's no such thing as bad publicity. Meh, let them run. Enjoy themselves. Let them exchange between other people who now believe they're attacking me, and I just don't care. Okay. And I'll tell you why I don't care. The next thing that's come up because of this is there's obviously a transition going on here, and I look at it as a positive transition. There are new things available in the app world that we didn't have at the time we formed, even just a year ago. So I'm excited about those changes. The whole team is super excited to move forward. Because of all of you, we've been able to make payroll this month, so I'm very happy about that, and I thank you for that. It's not really for me, it's for them, for people like Sunny and Mike and Zoltan Raquel that worked really hard day and night on that website to get it up and running for all of you, and are still working day and night now on the web app and a few other things. So I thank everyone that has offered to join us since the transition and help out. We have some amazing, talented people that have come on board that wouldn't have come on board before. Different circumstances, different situations. And, you know, some of these people had conflicts with other people that are no longer with us. So I'm happy to see that. But, you know, I kept hearing it over and over and over again. You know, there was a call yesterday from Langley 5 to the local people to see if I'm homeless yet, or, you know, where do I bank, or do I have any money, you know, or those types of things. And they were promptly told to, in a nice way, you can go away. We're not answering you.
Good.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously she's such a nice person. All she really cares about is that other people get paid, despite the fact that Kim has been making a whole lot of money out of the services that she provides, which fair enough, yeah, she's the one doing a lot of the work, putting the reports together, if only they were true, right? But as you heard for yourself, she has had this background training that is, you know, it's not like most people, clearly not agency trained though, is her assertion. You know, there just happens to be these underground illegal children's fight clubs that she managed to learn white eye or whatever it were called. So let's see. Kerry Cassidy interviewed Kim at length, more than once, 2, maybe 3 times. And as we know, Kerry Cassidy is very much on the whole Trump train thing. So they're on opposite sides of the deep state narrative. But Kerry shares in this clip what Kim herself told Kerry directly. So let's just have a listen to what that is.
So do you think she's mind controlled? Is that
I think perhaps when she was young, she was, because she seems to have gaps in her understanding and her memory of the overall story that I'm telling you. Anyway, I don't want to get into her psychology so much as to explain that. So she put herself out here in this way to attack Juan, and a very prominent way with this sort of sidekick, Sunny, on a recent video, very recent. It may have only been released this week. And so when that video came out, and I had occasional conversations with her, because you got to understand that what I do is fairly unusual, and I have contacts everywhere, and I don't throw somebody under the bus because they have a dark past. Understanding that is because all the people I interview have dark pasts. But it's very important to understand that, contrary to what Kim said on one of her broadcasts, he didn't assign himself this task, okay? He was obviously the person who, if you understand his profile, I mean, that since he was a kid, he was groomed to run for politics. Absolutely. In fact, even people that don't know what, it's kind of like, I don't know, you could even call it a kind of a Christ-like attitude about these people. is that they know not what they do. Okay. So maybe that's kind of an overlay that I have when I approach people that have worked on the dark side or come from the dark side, et cetera, et cetera. Or, for example, Kim, she is in this attack on Juan. She is clearly putting out disinfo. When I talk to her, even offline, I get the impression she kind of doesn't know the real truth. She has been told by her handlers certain things, and she takes it at face value. That's the way it sounds to me. But she may also have a deeper motive, which I don't know what it is, but
I don't imagine she's ever admitted to having handlers. That's something that you assume, or
well,
did
she
admit to
tells
that?
me, yes, I think I can say this. She told me very openly. She works with DARPA and the generals. That's what she says.
Oh, okay.
Those are her handlers. I mean, now she'll say, no, they're not her handlers, that she, whatever. Because she talks about working with an off-planet, council, etc. Well, you know what? I'm Pleiadian. I work with an off-planet council as well. How's that? Is that good enough for you? Anyone could say that. Anyone, because we all do. This is the weird thing, is that we are all from off planet. We are all here on a mission. We are all connected with races off planet. Nobody is an exception in this way. All right. So.
Okay, so you heard what Kerry says Kim shared with her quite openly, that she works with DARPA and the generals. Now, previous accusation that Ava Cowan put out when she made her statement about how horrendously she'd been attacked by Kim, and as we heard in that clip from Kim, somehow, somewhere, by someone, she was trained to remote view and get in and out of buildings and astral project and astral travel and all of that kind of stuff. And I believe her on that because I've had astral attacks. So yeah. Now there are many, when you get into the occult secret societies and stuff, there's many different ways and places that could have been taught. But one of the things that did come to mind was that when Ava Cowan had accused her of being CIA, the Gateway program, which teaches, astral travel, remote viewing, all of that kind of stuff, did come to mind. As Kerry Cassidy says, there appears to be, there's definitely contradictions in Kim's backstory. Some of that, I believe, is deliberate. She's, misrepresenting herself, who she is, how she came to be involved in certain things. It's deliberate deception, but I do believe what Kerry's saying there, which is I think there's also historically, as in Kim's past, I think there has been some form of mind control potentially that's being done there, because she, when there's loads of clips on YouTube or various other platforms where people will talk about, such as your Jeffrey Epstein sort of character, and it's like, how did they become so prominently placed among all of these elites, and what was it that made them so valuable in those circles, before being thrown under the bus. And what comes through a lot is that what seems to be highly valued is where someone has the ability to present, on the one hand, this very likable, very warm, very like connectable kind of persona, and yet can switch on a dime and be utterly ruthless and utterly cold, no empathy, those qualities which appear to come through some form of programming. that seems to be how people are selected as assets and operatives and whatnot. And based on my experience, I think that fits absolutely with Kim. And I've put some screenshots there just of, you know, whether it's DARPA, whether it's CIA, that we know agencies, it's, you know, they're all interconnected and share each other's processes and assets, and the people can be involved on multiple levels with different groups, right? So whether this is the true, you know, associations that Kim has is another question, but it's worth noting that, you know, how clever of a front would it be to have someone who is so good at the pretense, the acting of, you know, these are the, I've been running around this planet for all of these years fighting these people, and I've been doing it all alone despite having millions of people supposedly that I were working with. And you know, I've had to redesign a whole quantum system all by myself. Well, we'll have a look at that, because in 2016 you stated very clearly that the Universal Protection Unit had the system and they were supposed to be doing stuff with it, and you made it sound like, you know, that was all happening in the here and now all the way back in 2016. The, you know, financial systems were being changed then. Something were either never happening in the first place or something's changed in between. So you know, I would go with it were never happening in the first place. But let's move on. Let's see. Okay, so here's another clip where it's from that same UNM broadcast, the 12th of January 2024. And this is Kim talking about her taking over the GIA all the way back in 2012.
And number two, I have dealt with all these people from all these different countries before. And sometimes I have tripped up and made mistakes, and sometimes I haven't. But I learned something from everyone that comes forward. Mm-hmm. I'm not arrogant in any way. I'm very humble when I meet these people and talk to these people. And each one of them, despite their best efforts, failed at an attempt to handle me. However, I learned valuable things from these people, and for the most part, and not to be mean to these agency people, but I kept them around long enough till I can learn all I needed to learn, and then that was it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give you both the positive sides, positive side to people I have met, and the negative side to people I have met, and how things ended between me and them,
okay,
for one reason or another. So that being said, I also need to make a statement about something else, in case people are unclear. The Global Intelligence Agency has been around for thousands of years. It was originally intended to protect and provide security for the elite and the non-humans while they are present here on Earth. And by non-humans, I mean the ones from the lower astral that came here during the Dark Ages. That was their job, whether it was to feed them or, you know, find them places to be, those types of things. That was the job of the Global Intelligence Agency for eons. Mm-hmm. Now, the name the Global Intelligence Agency officially came to be in the 1940s, right about the time World War II ended. That was when it officially was registered as the name, the Global Intelligence Agency. You might also know these people as portrayed in movies as the Men in Black.
Yeah.
You would know them sometimes as the secret space program operatives we talk about. by all different shapes and forms, meaning cyber life, from cybersecurity to physical security to a number of different things. You would also know these people sometimes in the past as the Order of the Black Sun. You could also call them Solomon's demons. That's who these people were. Now, I took it over in 2012. Why did I take it over and what happened here? That meant the name became registered to myself. After that, did they still continue as operatives and telling people they were the Global Intelligence Agency? Yes, they did, for quite a long time. And I have to explain this because at the end of this broadcast, I'm going to explain to you why their money didn't come today. By 2012, I took over as the director. Now, none of these people would listen to me. I wiped out everyone that was registered. But unfortunately, these people individually had already been registered with nearly every intelligence agency on Earth in their systems. And they were also registered to places like NATO and other agencies. This is where you would see people like what I call Langley 5 or the 5-star generals. You would see a lot of different groups intertwining in working with or for the Global Intelligence Agency for a long time. So that's who they were. Now, since I've taken it over, and then I was able to gain more access since that time, by about 2016 to the Alpha system. Not that I didn't always have access, I just didn't fully understand how to use it. And it took me years to learn. So this was a process. It wasn't like I got a handbook like you do when you get a new PC and they tell you how to use a quantum system that spans densities and dimensions. Other factors as well, if you remember in 2012, at the end of 2012, we were all gonna die. You remember that? We were also all gonna die in Y2K. We've been gonna all die for a while now because nobody really knows what to expect. But it never happens, and we're all still here. Old text or whatever it is that people are reading may not necessarily be true. We talked about that on Wednesday, okay? Now, by the time I formulated the key intelligence and military system is when I started having more and more access to all intelligence and military systems worldwide. I could tap into anyone's intelligence agency, anybody's military, just like the Global Intelligence Agency used to be able to do, along with the NSA and the ACIO and a lot of people that we've mentioned before. So that gave me kind of a leg up on my so-called enemy. I also had access to the AVILP4 system and the Net6 system for that very reason. And I also knew when proposed paydays were supposed to be, not only for the Global Intelligence Agency, but also, for other parties that would get paid as well. So I've been the director of the Global Intelligence Agency since 2012. I have the highest clearance in the world. I can make my clearance 10,000, 10 billion if I want to, because I control the Global Intelligence Agency, and the Global Intelligence Agency has controlled all agencies worldwide and all militaries worldwide forever. Okay, since its inception, at least for 3 millennia. If not more. So.
Okay, so a lot of responsibility there. So she took over the GIA in 2012, but her narrative has been that when she was first appointed as the trustee, which came as a surprise to her, remember, because she was just trying to bring gold to the US to solve the economy, and then she ended up having all these high-profile meetings with different people, and obviously she'd been identified years before without her knowing that she'd got special DNA and she was a representative for the light, and she she was surprised when she was appointed to be trustee. She thought, wow, this is great. I'm going to be able to help so many people. And then she started learning the ropes. This is what she said. You know, it took her a while to understand that her position, although she was being told that she was just there to follow instructions and transfer money as Marduk instructed her to. And it took her until 2014, 2015 to figure out, actually, you know, I'm the one running this. This is, you know, I don't just have to do as they're telling me. It's my system. I can decide how to use it, and I'm going to help people. That's what she's claimed. And yet, she was appointed as director of the Global Intelligence Agency. In her own words, she took it over in 2012. Now, if I'd been flying around the world trying to figure out how to solve the world's problems, and had been told I were a trustee, and what that would allow me to do is access a system where, through instruction from others, I'd be able to transfer monies, and at some point I'd be able to transfer monies to help people. I'd find it quite strange if someone then said, oh, and by the way, you're also the director of a global intelligence agency that's been around for 3,000 years, that no one else has known about because it's so top secret and high profile, and it runs all the other militaries, just nobody knows about it. If that was told to me, I'd be questioning, well, I thought I'm just being appointed as a trustee to transfer monies that hopefully at some point are going to become funds for people, project funding and humanitarian projects. And, you know, how have I ended up being the director of a global intelligence agency? And how would I know right off the bat to start clearing that out? Because she said so many times she didn't know how dark and, you know, nefarious the people she'd now somehow been roped into being involved with. She didn't know that. It took her time. You know, it wasn't until 2015 when she confronted Marduk and said, you know, I'm done with this and I'm not going along with this anymore. So how did you know in 2012 to start clearing out the GIA? That's interesting. And why? So in that same broadcast, she runs through all these various handlers, all these attempts that they had to control her, to prevent her from doing her mission on the planet, which is to ensure humanity wins this time. So as part of that whole layout of the handlers, one of the people who she talks about is Jesper Ellerman. Now, what I know from having now done research is when Kim does these kinds of reports, it's damage control. She's putting out fires. So there had been on certain chats on Telegram, there'd been people posting things, asking certain questions in like what, you know, she's claiming this, but there's evidence of this and something else. And so one of the things that she'd been criticized about was her involvement, her association with certain people, Jesper Ellerman being one of them. Not the only one, but one of them. And so this is Kim's damage control reaction to explain why she would have had any association with these people. And she goes on in this broadcast to describe Jesper Ellerman as he comes from a bloodline family that were Silent Circle, Black Sun, had connections to, I think she says, Hell's Angels and IRA, and, you know, the various sort of criminal and or negative, you know, sort of influences on the planet. But one of the things people had posted was, I will move to the next screen so I can show you, was these documents that were dated 2013 that, as you can see here, Global Intelligence Agency, Kimberly A. Goguen, trustee, director and vice president of global banking, Jesper Ellerman, and then there's some other people named, and it's supposed to be an official document showing, you know, Kim being director of Global Intelligence Agency, having these associates working with her as part of the Global Intelligence Agency. So in 2012, she took it over, didn't question that, despite being very surprised that she'd become trustee, let alone director of an intelligence agency. But while she's clearing it out, one of her attempted handlers, who was Blackstone and Silent Circle connected, she appointed to the Global Intelligence Agency. So in that report where she's talking about him being a handler, she does state that, you know, he wanted to be involved in that, and she didn't actually meet him in person until 2014, but he'd had involvement with Global Intelligence Agency. Well, you took it over in 2012, and he were appointed in 2013, so he would have had involvement if you involved him as director, wouldn't he? So her association with Jesper Ellerman, despite what she says in this broadcast about him being this, you know, Black Sun / Silent Circle sort of bloodline character, I'm assuming, because people were sharing these documents, that had come originally from when Kim was first involved with the Speak Project. This were the kind of stuff that they started sharing as proof of Kim's credentials, essentially. They were basically proving that she did have this background that she was telling people she had in terms of working at these high levels and having had meetings with Maru Kanenki and Enlil and global leaders and all of that kind of stuff. So they had themselves shared these documents, and then it had come around later where people were going, hang on a minute, you know, how does this make sense when this person is someone who you've now claimed to have been, you know, like a negative character? So let me see, I can't remember exactly what this clip is, but it must be connected to this. So let's just see what Kim has to say here.
Well, I want to talk to you about handler number. I don't know what number I'm on at this moment in time, but let's talk about him. Jesper Ellerman. Jesper Ellerman has been all over the world, running around with documents that I haven't spoken to him since 2017, most likely for discrediting purposes, I would say. Now, Jesper, his real name is Peter. Peter worked for his father, Jesper, who was also known as the Jack. Mm-hmm. The Jack is a title in the tables of the Silent Circle. Okay?
Okay.
So you could say that I spent, let's see, I met him in 2013. First time he ever met me was in 1998 in the Bahamas, but I didn't know that at the time. But we met in 2013 by phone. And the first thing he says is, I'm an assassin. I said, okay. He goes, and he says to me, it's pretty funny. He says, you're not afraid. I said, well, let me see. If I get really afraid, is it going to stop you from coming after me and trying to kill me? He goes, no. And I said, okay, then what's the point? you know, you obviously called me for a reason. What is it you want? You know, well, turns out it's handler number, however many we're on now here. We met in person in 2014. He came to Arizona. At the time, it was in Tucson. We spent a number of hours talking to each other, that kind of thing. Security plans. He wanted to be a part of the Global Intelligence Agency, and he was for a time. He also was responsible for making the $1 deal with the Silent Circle. So you can give him that. And then he too lost his noodle around the end of December 2016 to December 2017. So sometime within that time frame. Now, part of the reason why he started to lose his noodle is because I had just got to Durango, Colorado. And Mr. Johnson was my handler here, member of the Johnson crew in every way. That was not his real last name when he started this gig. And Jesper realized he was losing his grip. You know, this is the separation, divide and conquer kind of thing. So he knew he wasn't in control, but I still learned some things in that year time span on who these people were and why this town existed. Jesper would say some things like, your people are my people. You need to tell, you know, and he named it by first name. I'll leave that out. You need to tell him that. And so I told him that. I said, well, Jesper says his people are your people. He goes, well, we don't have any of those people there. And, you know, that type of thing here. And I said, well, I don't know. He says your people are his people. Now, I had no idea that they were all part of the Order of the Black Sun at the time. A term like that came along about a year or so later. But I kept all of these things in the back of my mind, you know, as I moved forward, all the things that Jesper had taught me about. Jesper and I made another second trip in 2015 over to Russia together. You know, we stayed at various Airbnbs around the city. We're there for probably about 3 weeks. That was the time when I met Marduk. He did not go to that. You know, yeah, it was an experience and a half, that's for sure. But yes, they had been there since I was there the last time. So 5 years later, you know, 4 years later, whatever it was, they were still there. So Jesper had a lot of connections around the world. He had connections with the Hells Angels, Colombian Mafia, IRA, Russian mafias groups, because there's plural, the Yakuza, the Triads, you name it, he had those connections. As you know, all these different groups are just different sides of the Order of the Black Sun. So that was that story. There's a lot I could tell you about that in between, but probably for another day because we've been going for quite a while now. So let's talk about China's Black Widow program.
Okay, so she is, as you are describing him as a very shady character. And so it seems strange that she would have added him to the GIA when she was clearing it out of all of those people. It's also strange that within that window where she says from the end of 2016 to the end of 2017, that's because she, I don't think, could remember exactly when she had last done an interview, which she did on THI. At that time, Kim was heavily involved with what had been Cosmic Voice, so Thomas Williams. Kim had been involved as a viewer and as a community member. There is digital sort of footprints of Kim commenting very much as like a lay person, you know, complaining about chemtrails and talking about the deep state in a very removed sort of way, 2014, 2015, on the Cosmic Voice platform. Then, come 2016, Kim kind of partners up with Thomas Williams. He breaks off from Cosmic Voice, starts his own sort of radio show, podcast type thing, which is the THI, and then starts interviewing Kim as this, you know, high profile insider that's been battling the deep state, and they've been attempting to handle her, and she's got this system that is going to, you know, take over the financial systems and military systems and all of this stuff. So her first interview, as far as I'm aware, with Thomas Williams on any of that was that UPU show where she was with Ava and Megan, and they introduced the UPU as being, you know, benevolent ET group that was working with humanity to change things into a more positive state on the planet, and, you know, restore palate to the people and solve all the world's problems. That was 2016. In 2017, the clips that I played you earlier of the Manor Trust thing and the Kingdom of Manor, Jesper Ellerman was Kim's associate in that. So if we move to this, so bear in mind what she's just said about him. Kim was being interviewed online, telling people about all the positive changes that were happening, that her and millions of other people were, they'd put portfolios together and were flying around various countries, explaining to governments how, you know, they could reclaim their right to the resources of those countries, and how they could begin to restore, you know, prosperity back to their peoples, and all of that was supposedly happening. And yet the person that she was in association with doing this was the very person she's just described, Jesper Ellerman. So let's have a listen to what she says about him in this interview. So this is it's the same one that I played clips from before. So it's the 1st of August 2017. So that's in that window where, you know, somehow just after this, he lost his noodle, and, you know, his whole helping humanity thing, that's when Kim realized that he wasn't going to do that, bearing in mind he would Silent Circle and Black Sun anyway. Let's see what she says.
People think.
Well, Jesper himself has been recognized as the warrior, which we'll get into a little bit later. So Jesper is on the front lines fighting against the system. Jesper is, if you notice his title, it's actually Grand Master Knight. So he is a knight, or a Grand Master Knight, which in the days of old was actually the party who would lead the troops to war, or would lead all the other knights. The only king on planet Earth, as it always was actually God, or source, or creator. It was never any other being in the days of old. So that is why Jesper holds the title as Grand Master Knight. It does show that he is a royal monarch, which means that he has the right to rule over other monarchs, although they are monarchs unto themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Does that make sense to you? That he has the right to rule over all of the sovereign beings, despite the fact he's Order of the Black Sun and Silent Circle? So a couple of screenshots here. The website for the Sovereign Kingdom of Man is still up, still using the same trust codes and all of that. That, as we can see here, on the 30th day of October 2017, His Majesty Jesper Elleman of the Kingdom of Manor is acknowledged by Kimberly Ann Goguen of Manor World Holding Trust. I'm not going to read the whole thing out. You know, if you want to pause and zoom in whenever I make this available, feel free to do so. There's many of these types of documents that, again, these were being circulated as proof of who Kim was. When you start doing more research into that trust account and the different groups it's being associated with, it gets confusing, but it becomes more and more evident just how shady all of this is. In those interviews that Kim did on the Manor World Holding Trust, she was talking about, you know, they'd been allocated a country as in an actual geographical location. It was an island close to Papua New Guinea, apparently. And remember, there were millions of people involved in this, and they were teaching the rest of the world how to free themselves from the enslavement systems. And this is the stuff Kim was telling people as fact, as if it was genuine information. At the same time, she's saying, you know, Jesper was an attempted handler and you were losing his grip on me because I had another handler. But she's, you know, she's never been really involved in the deep state other than getting a hold of the system to save humanity. And as I've put here, hadn't she already taken Madu out by that point? Because when she did the UPU show, it was a confirmed kill at that point. Her words that, you know, they'd ran an operation, her and the Universal Protection Unit. She said there were 150 confirmed kills during that operation, all these different, you know, deep state and or off-planet sort of entities that had been interfering with humanity's progress forward. So, you know, her being the super specially abled, whatever, she'd been the one, you know, taking them out in the astral, or however she supposedly did it, getting in and out of buildings without being seen and all that. But here's the thing. So she'd already got to that point where she was working at that kind of level, and she was working with the UPU. Why didn't they clue her in on Jesper Elleman not being the royal monarch and warrior and Grandmaster Knight who was gonna help free humanity? Like, how did that slip through the net based on what she's just said in the previous clip herself? Gets confusing, right? Okay, so we're going to bring it back to the now because living in the now is so important according to Kim. And I wonder, let's see if there's any inspiration from content I'd been creating privately that may have given Kim that inspiration to want to talk about the need to be in the now. And you know, let's highlight this as well, because we are constantly saying, this is Kim and, you know, whoever the we is that she's referring to in this, we are constantly saying there is no saviour. I mean, you know, obviously none of us measure up to Kim, but just to be clear, she's not a saviour, and because that includes herself. So the only thing she can do is help you understand who you really are with the wisdom that I learn every single day. Interesting that it's wisdom you learn, Kim, not wisdom that you steal from anybody else, or information that you then distort into deception to confuse people. You helping people understand who they really are. I've put a screenshot here. This is a very recent report that, was one of her Global Intelligence Agency reports, 19th of April 2025. And I've highlighted, so she's telling people the illusion, it's all coming to an end because yet another covenant has now ended. And the charade that's been playing out in the omniverse unravels. And the biggest truth of all? Your soul never lost its connection to Source. Interesting, Kim, because you have been telling people how cut off from Source they've been. For years, you've been telling them that. Only you have maintained your connection, according to you. But why might you feel inspired to now start letting people know that they have their own connection? Well, I had a private conversation where I told a family member I fully intended to start calling Kim out on what was blatant nonsense, and the fact that, as I've already explained a few times, I'd sent content last year, it'd been misused. I'd explained, how the planes of existence are the different levels and layers of the soul's transmission that inform and instruct and inspire the different effects, the types of experiences that we have, and all of that. I know that she knows this stuff, but she'd chosen to, misuse, misrepresent information, and she'd chosen to consistently reinforce this idea that everyone's at the mercy of these nefarious AI systems and how interfered we're being. And, of course, there are negative influences, but at the same time, you have been going out of your way to give people the impression that there is something special about you that doesn't apply to them. And if there's one thing I could convey to people, there is nothing Kim claims that is special about her that other people don't have the ability to do and or aren't already doing. They're just not overblowing it and exaggerating it and making it seem as if they are a chosen one to get money out of people and energy out of people and attention from people, which is essentially what Kim is doing. In this other report, the 28th of April 2025, in that report, she talks about how the deep state have been busy hacking people, and goes into how they're accessing people through the cameras and on the phones and listening to people. That was after I had another private conversation, and for the first time, admitted out loud to someone who I trusted that I genuinely knew by that point I was being listened to, and I was somehow, some way being observed. And that, to bring it, to connect this back to the start of this presentation, if you like, this session, that's the kind of thing that Kim has done consistently, where I believe her intention has been to just, really get under my skin, rile me. So me admitting, and I were upset as I spoke about it and said, it's so intrusive and I need to speak on it. I need to do something about it because I can't carry on like this, feeling as if what I had believed was supposed to be a positive figure has turned out to be like a nightmare in the flesh sort of thing. I need somehow to balance this out and reset the record, because I'm not happy with how the content I shared has been used. I'm also not happy feeling like I'm being listened into, and the fact that she would take me speaking on that and use it as a segment in her report in a very once again, inverted way, you know, deep state are doing this, but in reality, it's what she's involved in, and it's what she has been doing. So that's recent, as you can see. So this talk of the now and how the now works. So as I've put a note there, taken distorted from my discussion of what time is from the God source creator sovereignty. It's a topic I will be laying out with more explanation in more detail, but I referenced to it because I was talking about data processing. So I'm just going to play you the clip and then we'll see what she had to say. Talking about his theory of time and what it means in terms of how we perceive it. For a very long time, guidance I've been receiving, whenever the concept of time has come into the the theme of or topic of what I've been looking at, I've always heard it's data processing. What time ultimately is information processing. So what we're attending to right now is our present, data that we've attended to in the past, that we've processed in the past, we know as the past, and any data that will go on to process will, right now that's our future, but will become our present when we're processing it. And so we can jump around from past to present to future just in our thoughts any minute of any day sort of thing. You know, we can measure time, but what it actually is and does is really us processing. And when we talk about, you know, the densities and the various dimensions, the reason why there can be such difference in functionality is the amount of data that is not only available, as in how much light is available, it's also, because I'm not sure if I already said this now, but the higher the density, the more light it is. The lower the density, the less light there is. So the more light you've got, obviously, the more possibilities and potentials of what can be created exist, but also to exist within that density as a character, an avatar, as a vessel, a vehicle through which God's source creator can explore and adventure and experience things. There has to be the capability, the capacity to process more data, to be able to process more and more information. So that's just a snippet. I do go on to explain in more detail, and it is something that what I was referencing to in terms of when I said his theory, I was talking about an interview that Stephen Wolfram, as a physicist, had done with Dr. Brian Keating. He has presented a new sort of theory of time, which ties in with that. But the reason I got on about that was because I was talking about, as in the soul transmission being energy, light. I'm not going to the full explanation of that because I've referenced it in the previous session. I talked a bit about it, and also it's in the sessions itself, themselves. So I was talking about that because I was talking about how he had said, as a physicist, we don't really think of formulas and equations in the same way that we used to. We talk about them now as programs, which ties in with when you understand planes of existence and densities and, the interaction there, the matrices that are created through that interplay, which is what I'm laying out in the Reality as a Simulation series. So that's what I was referencing. I touched upon and explained, time in that, from that perspective. And so Kim has taken that and ran with it. So she's telling people, when you think of the now, you might think of it as being in the present moment. enjoying what is currently around you and planning in the now and thinking only of the now. Somehow, as humans, we were always dragged into the past, present, and the future, and that was for a reason. You see, because Artie, this is the ultimate artificial intelligence system that's been working against everybody, All and Alice, the two sub AI systems that have also been working against humanity and otherwise could only create in the past, present, and future. But good news, everybody, over the course of the last 30 to 45 days in Earth time, most everybody has gotten rid of the past, present, and future and lives in the now. The now is where the golden age lives, as it has been constructed. The now is where true Earth exists. And then she does a very helpful diagram where she shows, you know, how time flows essentially as data transmission. And, you know, outside of past, present, and future, there is now this whole other world that's being constructed that is the golden age, true Earth, and that's apparently what we've all now entered into. So I don't know about you, but in the last 30 to 45 days, have you stopped having a past? Do you no longer have a past? Are you not projecting into the future every time you plan to do something, or, you know, decide to book a holiday? Or this is the kind of stuff that, you know, she's just confusing people, and it's not true. None of it, you know, it's like people are like, yes, we're now in the golden age. What actually has changed? Because let me tell you, Friday, I called to the supermarket to pick up a few bits. There were some lovely middle to elderly age women in the entrance that had set up a stand. Very politely, as I walked in, asked if they could give me a list. They were collecting donations for the food bank. So of course, I'd walked in without a trolley, but of course, I'd only gone for a couple of bits, so I filled the basket up with things that they'd asked for and gave it to them. And I'm not saying this to be like, look at me, look how great I am. It's not about that. What struck me is, I'll have to find the clip, I've not included it in this, but Kim were telling people 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, world hunger had been solved. No child were going to go hungry. I am seeing more and more proof of more and more people struggling financially and struggling to get basic needs met. And according to her, she has known since 2017 all the legal loopholes that would help people free themselves from these oppressive systems that would solve all these problems. So why has she not been teaching it? Because I'm seeing people not just still suffering, but increasingly so. And, you know, we can laugh about the fact that Kim is teaching people, you know, whatever the opposite of quantum physics is, you know, quantum fantasy is what is being taught here. But it's having a real effect, because it's stopping people that would actually use their time and energy to learn what can and could change not just things in their own lives, but for other people. And instead, they're plugging into this, thinking it's all been fixed, it's all been sorted. So, moving on, Kim's next quantum fantasy segment. So, this would be Earth's core. So she's showing the Earth as an atom, basically, you know, the atomic kind of structured, but in this case it applies to Earth. So this would be Earth's core, which had been totally distorted in so many ways. Had been, not is, had been. You could call this a nucleus. So if this was a nucleus in this description, you would have electrons going around in multiple directions, as many electrons as you had floating around and going through the nucleus. Well, as it relates to Earth, you actually had holographic artificial electrons that were mini-Earths. There are an infinite number of these around Earth and around every planet in this galaxy that actually created the artificial future, even though it was only a zeptosecond around yourself and around the planet. This same structure existed around humans too. So we've all got mini-Earths and mini-Uses flying around ourselves that are creating artificial versions of us. You know, it's all happening to us. We have not until now, until the last 30 to 45 days, where we've come out of that past, present, and future, and now we're in the golden age where everything's just getting fixed for us. Prior to that, you know, everything negative that we experience, it was just artificial Earths and others that were just flying around, you know, somehow, some way, just hacking us and keeping us in negative states and negative systems. Let's see where Kim may have got the idea to talk about it in these terms, shall we? So that was her session on the 27th of May. This is a clip from the session that I'd recorded on the 22nd, and this is another one on the 23rd. So the short clips, let's just have a listen what I might have been talking about. The words assigned is really important. Anything that we have to sign for, we are assigning from the soul's point of view, we're acting on behalf of Source to agree to it. That's why it's a sign of nature. It's also the reason why the soul is often represented as an X, because when you've got this infinity flow happening, we're here. That's us. And any and every other representation of Source, but those of us with agency, and we'll talk about this when we get into the densities, those of us with agency, we sit there. So you've got, on the one hand, your input, and of course it's not just a linear, rather, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just one directional, it's toroidal. This is why anything that is living, organically speaking, has the energy toroidal sort of flow around it, and that's true on all levels. So when the sessions that I linked from last year, when I talked about what I saw in the outer body experience, I saw this, but at the meta, you know, big sort of highest sort of level of perception. I've since been doing a whole lot of research into stuff, and this, you know, that is true all the way down to the very teeny tiny quantum level. But, you know, we'll talk about that as we get into it in more detail. So I was doing that, you know, the organic, the connection to the construct. Our immediate world is planet Earth, but she sits within a construct which is the solar system, which sits within a construct which is the galaxy, and you know, and so it goes. So him talking about light, water, magnetism, how to essentially reset our systems back to their organic coding, like default, I guess, you know, the original blueprint, so powerful and useful. And I will, you know, in upcoming sessions I'll be calling on his work again to reference, but I would highly recommend, and I'll put for this session recommended resources together, and I will be putting him on there. So he talks about input and output, but he's talking at the quantum, like biological sort of level. So he will talk about it in terms of electrons and then proton expression, which I will show. I'll show you how that fits with this when we do the holographic session, because it was a light bulb moment for me when he talked about that. His interviews with, he went on the Rick Rubin. Right, so in that clip, that second one, I'm talking about Jack Kruse's work, Dr. Jack Kruse. So where he talks about quantum biology as our electrons being the input, which is about densities of light. It's, you know, the electrons become excited, they shift frequency dependent upon how much light they interact with, and as and where they do absorb light. How much light is present in the system will determine the health of the system, and also for us, in, you know, that the first three planes of our existence is connected to our physical well-being, and beyond that, what we experience in terms of mood and state and psychological kind of processing and all of that is connected to how much light is present in the system, essentially. So, you know, I'll explain that properly when I do that session that I've just spoke about. But that's what I was referencing. And then your proton expression, dependent how much light is present in the system, your proton rather, then in terms of density expression, what essentially version of reality we can access will be directly correlative to the amount of light in the system, as in the electron input. And then, you know, if you think of the terminology that we use around these things, it's kind of self-evident, because we'll talk about being, you know, down in the dumps in a dark place. You know, I were in a very blue state, you know, I had the blues kind of. When we talk about it in terms of light and dark, what we're typically referencing is how much light we've absorbed. And if you look at my sessions, I explain the relevancy of that in terms of, you know, the sensation. What we call love is what we experience when we absorb more light, and it all connects together, right? And when you listen to it laid out in a logical, sequential fashion, it makes sense. But when people take that information and then just make stuff up and misrepresent it, it stops making sense. So, you know, this whole, we had mini Earths flying around that were artificial, that we just got sucked into somehow, is utterly ridiculous. But I know where she took the inspiration for that from, and it was from my content. So let's just see, what is this? Oh yeah, so this is Kim. After I've, you know, I showed you that clip at the start, which is from the part 1 to this, where I'm calling her out as false light, you know, presenting back to people the truth of what they are, but in the distorted way of what you are is what I'm pretending to be, basically. And of course, Kim in her session also felt the need to talk about false light, but obviously she wouldn't associate that with herself, because does she believe she's actually doing good on this planet? I doubt it somehow, but you know, she wants other people to believe that. So, and the reference to the circadian rhythm, but because they had broken your circadian rhythm, as if that's something that's now changed. Again, what we engage with, what we engage in, will determine how optimal our systems function or not. So, you know, that's connecting to Jack Kruse's work, which again, here she is misusing it. Just a reminder, all of the content I recorded, not last week now, the week before, so from 20th of May up to now 29th of May. None of it's still all unlisted, none of it's being shared. So the amount of correlation, and as you can see here, I'm pointing out, I took this screenshot earlier today, so this was 3rd of June. So up to this point, nobody's supposed to know any of this, and yet Kim's drawn so heavily from it. Okay. So here's, for me, some questions we could and should be asking Kim for people who really do want to trust and believe that she is who she says she is. Let's start asking more detailed questions, because Kim is very good at putting things across in a very, you saw it with that segment where she's talking about Jesper Ellerman being a handler, and she's just like, yeah, so much I could say about this, but I'll leave it for another day. And yeah, we kind of, went around the planet, but just anyway, a lot's happened. Yeah, it's like, if you're gonna make these extraordinary claims, give us more detail, because a lot of what you're saying is not stacking up. A lot of it is contradicting. So what exactly happened when you were appointed, Kim? That'd be a good start. So who was there exactly, please? All right, many years ago now. How many people? Who were they? Were they other trustees? Were they representatives of the families? Were they agency people? Who exactly was there? What specific building did you go to? What did they give you at the time? Did you get a badge? Did did they hand over the system there and then to you? What happened next? Where did you go? Did you go out to celebrate? Were you straight on another flight somewhere else in the world? What happened next? Because you've given this very vague tale of, being taken by other trustees and finding out you're the new trustee, but certain things are not stacking up. So, give a very detailed account of it. When did the system come into your possession? In what form? Were it a laptop? Were it on a chip? What? When did you pass it to the UPU? I'd love to know this, because in the UPU show, Kim claims the UPU had the system. How long did they have it? Why did they hand it back without figuring out how to use it? Are they not the, higher dimensional, higher density beings who are helping to free humanity? What happened with that? I also would love to know, given that the reason why she was selected as trustee is, one of the reasons is she's a match to the mitochondrial Eve. So she has stated in previous interviews or broadcasts that gives her the right to have this overriding, overruling vote when it comes to the use of the system. So she'd claimed that it would require 99% of humanity all agreeing on something to override her one vote, apparently. So if, knowing what I do about mitochondrial DNA, and I'm certainly no expert, but this is very easily checkable. You can go away and look this up online if you want to fact check me. If the mitochondrial DNA is exclusively passed down through the maternal line, which it is, and we're each and all anatomically modern human descendants of the first/original anatomically modern female known as the mitochondrial Eve, are we not all a match then to the mitochondrial Eve? Please explain, Kim, what makes your mitochondria special in a way that, let's verify it, let's check. What exactly is it about your mitochondrial DNA that's so much more of a match to the mitochondrial Eve than any of us? I'd love to know. If your DNA, as in your nucleic DNA, is a match to the financial system, And the financial system is designed to produce and create tokens for all physical representations of living souls. So in other words, we've all got DNA, we've all got a body, we're all representations of God Source Creator in terms of soul expression. If the financial system was set up to be connected to that, as in it prints and or creates tokens, whether digitally or coins or paper or whatever, in assignation to the DNA of the person, if that's what the whole Admiralty Law thing that she referenced herself in one of those clips, if that's what that's all about, do we not already all have our own connections to the financial system then? Because based on what I've shared with people already, the Richard Werner content where he explains how money is created, and it's upon the request of any and every living being, living soul out there, and not going to go into the whole conversion that happens, but if that is true, we already all have our connection to the financial system. So why would we be waiting for Kim to bring funds through? Shouldn't we then be learning how we can reclaim our rights to utilize that system in a beneficial way for ourselves as trustees, rather than as beneficiaries that someone else is administering the trust on our behalf? I'm pretty sure that's the direction we should be moving in. But, please tell us, Kim, why that can't be done. Why do we need to go through you? All right, I'd love to know who it was that took her to Durango, if that is the case, if someone took her there. Which agency? Did they pay for that relocation? I started saying this earlier, didn't I? Why have you been allowed to stay? Why didn't the UPU enforcer or locals prevent the stalker that in one of those girls' calls, Kim claimed someone who had been following her on UNM as like a viewer, as a fan. They just turned up at her door one day. Now, it seems very strange to me that she stays in that zone because it's super secure and she's got all of this protection, and yet a random anybody could just turn up, but yet she's protected. There's no deep state can get to her, or so I know she's obviously got all of her special skills that she talked about in that clip, but I'd just love to know again why that contradiction exists. Another question we could ask, and I think this is probably the most important: why don't you legitimize your claim, Kim? If you truly are who you have been telling people for years now you are, why not issue an affidavit statement of truth as a legal instrument? And I know before anybody that, well, their systems are corrupt, and yeah, okay, I get you. That's been Kim's excuse so far. She's not going to use their systems because their systems are based on the old control systems, and you're more than happy to use them when it suits you, Kim. You're more than happy to run businesses and register them into their systems, which is a complete contradiction to what you've been telling people for years now, which is their systems are defunct. And you've only recently been doing sessions about how all of their corporations are crashing, and there's no proof of that, but you're willing to use the systems where it serves you. So why not serve the people and sign your name to it, sign an oath that as a statement of fact and truth that you are who you say you are, you have the positions you say you have, you work in the capacity you say you do, in which case anybody and everybody should then have a right to perceive you and to treat you as any public figure, and I know you don't seem to like people asking questions and expecting you to explain yourself and prove your claim and whatnot, but anybody else who's claiming to have an official title or role that puts them in a position whereby they are supposed to be protecting other people's rights or ensuring people have access to resources, they're expected to do that. So why shouldn't you be? Why not legitimize your claim? Why have you, after all these years, still not even got as far as having some official website or something that states the truth? Why do you have so many legal disclaimers on your UNN app that, under the terms and conditions, negates any responsibility, any accountability for any of the effects that any of your content may have in terms of what people may choose in terms of their life choices based on what you're telling them is happening that may or may not, and is not really, when you look at it, happening. If you're going to put this kind of information out, there has to be accountability. And I would highly recommend anybody following her to really think about that. This is who you're putting your trust and faith in. Totally different if what she told people is, this is just a form of entertainment. Take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt. I'm just trying to give people, some excitement every week. That'd be totally different, but that's not what she's doing, is it? As we've seen in those clips, she is claiming she's got all this clearance and these systems, and she can listen into all of the deep state activities. And clearly, just in this session, that's disproven. And there's many other examples where, in fact, I've put a note here. I just want to touch on the Team Bubba thing. I have no personal affiliation with Team Bubba. I do, however, feel bad. I feel guilty that because Kim said that these guys were, involved in very nefarious activities, and she said in that clip earlier, they're NSA, they're MI6, I think it was that she said. But anybody that's been following her for a while will know that she made a very graphic statement about how she'd found out, who the culprits behind Team Bubba were, and these guys were, into child pornography. And she really, I don't even want to repeat it, but she went in on this whole, you won't want to see what I've seen, and it involved, deceased children. Really bad, really bad. Now I can see what she's doing. It's such an obvious amygdala hack. Anybody that understands, propaganda and how it works and the sensationalism, and it's a very common tactic to have people just shut down the thinking mind and react from emotion, and what it solidifies in the person's neural connections is whenever they hear that name, that term, that there's the visceral automatic reaction where you just no, I don't even want to know about that, I don't even want to think about that. And that's exactly why she made the claims that she did. Whoever those guys are, they have made lengthy statements and videos explaining they knew of Kim from Cosmic Voice. They themselves were listeners and viewers and were trusting and believing at the time that Thomas Williams was a legitimate, wanted to do good for the people, were bringing valuable information to light, and they themselves became somewhat disgruntled, disheartened, disillusioned. And they knew that Kim had been a member of the Cosmic Voice audience and that Kim had struck up a friendship with Thomas Williams through chats. And I think she said on one of the things, screenshots I had earlier, that it was Shane Sador or Shane Bales that had introduced her. Shane Sador, or formerly known as Shane Bales, he has put statements out saying, I never promoted Kim, you know, she's made it seem as if I introduced her to people like I'd vetted her or something. That was never the case. He warned people about her or against her, but she's very good at what she does, clearly, you know. She's very her level of conviction is impressive. I'll give her that. You know, she speaks with such authority, she speaks with such fluency and fluidity, even when you actually listen. There's so much diversions and so many vague, you know, she'll sort of touch on things, but she flows with such a sort of confidence in what she's saying that you're following along and not necessarily getting anything that has any real meaning, but it seems like it must be important because the way she's saying it, you know. So the Teen Bubba people, as far as I can tell, and again, I've not engaged with them, I don't know the people, I've just listened to what they've explained in terms of how and why they started investigating Kim, and that was because they'd known her from when she was sharing things as Christy Adams on the Cosmic Voice sort of Facebook page and stuff, and then the next thing they knew, she was being interviewed as this, you know, high level, like, new ground command, etc. So I feel guilty that I fell for that trick, that I didn't at the time pay attention to any of the videos they put out. I had quite the opposite reaction. I was very like, ooh, I'm not gonna engage with their stuff, but, ooh, you know. And it's, when I think about it now, it's like that's exactly what I criticize other people for, having that, you know, very tunnel vision, very sort of narrow-minded about things. Well, one of the easiest ways to get people into that state is to put something very graphic and, you know, ugly in their mind associated. So I'm not trying to promote and or suggest, you know, I'm not, people can do what they want. All I'm saying is, having now looked at some of their content, because I've been gathering this information about Kim, I now realise that that whole situation is not what she said it was at all, which, you know, it gets easier to believe when you realise most of what she's saying is not what she says it is at all. But on their videos, if you did decide to go and have a look, they have done a very good job of keeping a record of things Kim's claimed to be fact and this is happening. So, you know, there's clips where she's talking about how she's took certain companies down and destroyed all their systems and stuff. You can go and look it up. They're still running, you know, it's still, they haven't gone anywhere. And if I do more sessions, I'll draw on some of that, but I just wanted to mention that. So the interesting part about her position is she doesn't believe people understand what it is and who actually appointed her. Well, that's probably because of all these contradictions and because many things are provably false. Here's just a little thought experiment. I'm not going to go on for too much longer. I know I've been talking for a very long time. But for anybody who's still hanging in there, hoping, praying, believing Kim's going to bring funding out for people, I can't believe this didn't occur to me long ago, but more recently, obviously, been thinking about just different things of how unbelievable so much of what Kim says is, and yet I would hook, line and sinker. I were involved with the assemblies. I were ready to, you know, get them project proposals put forward. And anybody that has been following Kim for a while and or was involved in those assemblies, you will know that lots of people were asking lots of questions in terms of how it were going to work, you know, like, okay, so when you can get the funds from the backside system through to the front side and actually into people's bank accounts, like what then? And this weren't a one-off. There were many times Kim discussed this because people kept asking. And she was telling people what were going to happen was, because she was the only one with the connection to the system that could operate the system, initially what it would need to be would be that it had filtered sort of through your assemblies initially. What she and other people she were working with were looking to do was to repurpose, you know, when they take over everything, they were going to repurpose, like in the UK we would have like your job centre and your Department for Work and Pensions and these types of social services. So they were going to take over such as these and repurpose them, and these would become points of contact where people could submit like project proposals. It would still ultimately always have to go back to Kim for her to be the one that fully agreed. You know, the system took its instructions from her, and she had, in fairness to her, said at some point, you know, somewhere much further down the line, people could and should be able to start to connect themselves to the financial system, and so they could themselves ask for money and, you know, source could and would grant it, but that were further down. That were going to be a while. So to start with, anybody with a project idea or working in an assembly or, you know, wanting to do something to help would put their proposal forward. Kim would then vet that proposal ultimately, because what she did a whole session one time around, you know, you might be asking for too much money or not enough money, or you might be wanting to solve a problem that in that area of the world it don't need solving. You know, you're not going to need to sell ice to Eskimos or sand to Arabs. You know, so she was going to need to just like vet and approve everything. And so it dawned on me, you know, there's an estimated global population of around 8 billion people. There are some people questioning that, in fairness, you know, people saying that the population is actually much lower than that and it's been inflated to give us the impression of overpopulation, and some people claiming it's all to push the, you know, carbon tax agenda, and other people claiming a lot more people were deceased during the whole pandemic thing than has been reported. There's any information available these days, there appears to be some contradictory, something that, you know, it's like hard to know exactly what's true. However, the common consensus is global population at the minute is around 8 billion. So we know we've got this whole situation at the minute where, you know, there's the 99% and the 1%, and when you really dig into that, it's 0.1% who's got, you know, the concentration of the wealth. So obviously we wouldn't want to end up with that situation repeated, would we? But yeah, 1% of 8 billion is 80 million. So if only 1% of the planetary population put in project proposals, unless they Kim only spent 5 minutes on each, you know, bearing in mind she's got to read the proposal, it depends how detailed it is, how many pages it is, she's got to figure out whether they're asking for enough money, not enough money, whether it's a viable project idea, you know, she's got to vet it. So 80 million times 5, as in, let's allocate 5 minutes per project proposal. That's 400 million minutes. 400 million minutes divided by 60, because we want to, you know, make it a more relatable figure. So there being 60 minutes in an hour. So that, dividing that gives you an interesting figure. 6,666,666 hours. So if we were to divide that again by 24 hours in a day, so to make it into days, that gives us 277,777.78 days, nearly 200,777.77, yeah, so you get it. So that then divided by the 365.25 days, you know, to give us years. And so the figure there is, it would take 760.51 years for Kim to process allocation codes, authorizations, transfers, whatever, for 1% of the global population. And that's if she doesn't, you know, take breaks. That's, you know, we've already seen she's very good at multitasking there, so I'm sure she wouldn't need to, but without sleep, without, you know, breaking off to have a day off, or and we know how many caps she wears, but yeah, somehow if she dedicated every minute of every day for the next 777,000 days, if she did that, it requires 760 years of work for her to achieve that. So if anybody does want to, you know, keep hanging in there waiting for Kim to make it through to the front end of the system and put those payments in your bank account, just bear that in mind, that it's going to take a while if you do actually want to do a project to get anything out of her. And I, you know, put here, God doesn't concentrate powers, he decentralizes them, as shown and described in Dr. Jack Kruse's work. I'm referencing him because he talks about decentralized medicine in terms of, you know, how things have been concentrated, but the reference, what applies in the physical applies to every plane of our existence, every aspect of our being. And that is true with regards to our entire soul, you know, transmission. We are God source creator, experiencing, expressing self as these characters. The claim that Kim is making would be akin to claiming that any one cell in your body is responsible for the health and the function of every other cell and system. There is no one fractal or aspect that has power over everything and everyone else, unless they are very good at creating the illusion of that being true, and people trust and believe that and then fall for it. And that's what's happening here. So final thoughts, closing thoughts on this, and they're not my thoughts. I took this screenshot from Project Avalon blog just as I were having a look around at different things, and I'll just read it out to you. So it says, beware of Kimberly and Goguen, a pathological liar and fraud. She is the leader of the fraudsters group, claiming she is a member of the United Nations and has her badge and registration, yet cannot show them. She claims to control 80% of the gold and money wealth of the world, and that she is the sole signatory to more than 4,500 international bank accounts, off-ledger hidden, invisible accounts around the globe. The fact is, she lives in poverty, in hiding, that's meant to say, I think, and self-imposed house arrest. But, you know, she's in a zone, she's there for her own security, right? She's been around since 2007 and has orchestrated hundreds of scams where individuals lost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars falling into her trap. She is associated with December 5th company out of England run by a Pakistani fraudster. I don't know if that, I know I've looked up the company. She was very briefly named as a director on there. It doesn't really show the activities of the company. I don't know whether that's a true statement about. There are other directors named on there. One, interestingly, has the initial M, which made me think about the agent M, that she's, you know, that no one really knows anything about him other than what Kim and have said who he is and what he does. But what the reason I've highlighted that though is it's interesting. December 5th, according to Kim's information, is the birthday of the Order of the Black Sun. So it is kind of, raises a question mark. However briefly she was involved, named as a director of that company, given the name of it, it's kind of interesting that, how did she end up, one, being named on it, and two, why the name of the company is the birthday of the Order of the Black Sun. So just, interesting. She has been an associate of Mortgage Max. Well, she was the owner. She created that. A defunct mortgage firm out of Arizona, all scams. She has helped other quasi-legitimate finance agencies defraud investors with promises to get them into large transactions of high-yield investments if they lease bank guarantees for $300,000 each, when in fact they were all worthless scams, since she has neither banking nor finance connections anywhere on earth. She writes proposals to foreign government officials, promising them free gold and currency. When the time comes to provide her funds, she disappears. There are some things online that ties into the whole Metro Grant Holdings thing. Not something I could lay out and get into here. It seems like it needs a whole lot of unpacking. I do know that there was a newspaper article there naming Kim and saying she'd been involved in, this was on the African continent. I forget which of the African countries it was, but it had been reported that this sort of group of scammers had been trying to get money out of one of the governments over there. So I know she was named in that. Reports sent out to US agencies, FBI, and others to be aware of her activities and associations with rogue terrorist organizations. She claims her mission is to save the United States from economic collapse. She claims to have made offers to finance the entire US budget for the next 10 years, yet she is unknown in spite of all her alleged power and wealth. She's a dangerous criminal, sick-minded, manic-depressive, bipolar, psychotic, striving to attain power and influence. Now, these are their words, not mine. I think based on things I've said there, I've been on the receiving end of horrendous attacks, and I've been, cyber stalked essentially for no other reason than I tried to show support and promote her work and invest time and energy in actually helping. So, the reason I'm reading this out, if this had been a more recent rip-off report, which is where this was posted, I mean, I found it on Project Avalon's blog, they found it off rip-off report, right? So had it been a more recent one, I probably wouldn't have utilized it, because I do realize when people reach a certain level of success and or become, popular online or seem to be doing well for themselves, there's obviously always the potential that some people are going to get, if they've been bearing a grudge for whatever reason, or if people are going to get, let's say, maybe just jealous, maybe they genuinely think you don't deserve that, could it be put down to such as those things? Possibly. Of course, Kim's going to say it's a deep state trying to discredit her and take her down. If you look at the part 1 that I did to this, I lay out how she herself uses those tactics, because she's very recently done that to another content creator, and, you know, publicly commented on his videos, accusing him of things that she had no proof for. But what did interest me is that this were reported in November, or I don't know if it's the American way around, so either the 3rd of November or the 11th of March, 2015. Kim, at that point, in terms of her online presence, the digital footprints that she left, she were more like asking questions and following other people's, you know, insider intel and stuff. She wasn't presenting herself as any high level, you know, insider and or experiencer, or that didn't start until 2016. So as I've said, there's a lot more information online. If I'm going to continue to be attacked, because I've been talking for so long now, I can't even remember if I said this right at the start, but this past week, as you can imagine, from me recording that first part 1, it's been non-stop attacks. And, you know, although, as I say in that part 1, I've got a lot better at knowing how to handle that, but it doesn't make it any more pleasant to have to do that. And it certainly doesn't make it any more pleasant me having to know that I'm being listened to. And, you know, that needs to stop. And if I've got to figure out how I can personally, directly take Kim to court, that's one thing I'm thinking about. That's, you know, some of the guidance I'm receiving. She knows I have access to the resources to learn about that stuff. And I'm not talking about suing UNN or whoever, whatever agencies and or organizations she's working with in the background. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about her directly, personally. If that's what I need to do to stop this from happening, I'll do it. So it's, you know, I'm not going to pretend I already have all the answers. I'd have to really do my research and see how I'd need to go about that. But that she wants to carry on. That's where this could go. And in the meantime, I'll keep telling people the truth, and I'll keep exposing her for who and what she is. So that being said, I've been talking for so long. I appreciate anybody who does come to listen to this and view this at any point. I appreciate all the people who have been putting information together about Kim and making it possible to, you know, piece together, to the degree that I have, more about her, because, you know, being on the receiving end of nasty energies and all of that stuff, it's been eye-opening. I've learned a lot in terms of the occult stuff, but I still wouldn't have been able to make sense of potentially who she is and what she's doing without this kind of stuff. So thank you to people that have taken the time and have cared enough to, you know, highlight this stuff. On that note, I have nothing but love and appreciation for anybody who has taken the time to listen, and I will say good night.